Chapter 1, First Steps. See crunch. The bathroom mirror fractures under his fist, not quite shattering but definitely splintering outward from his knuckles. He can still see his furious, angry features in its reflection, for a moment anyways, before they begin to smooth out into abject confusion. What? Where was he? What was this? V, living legend of Night City, king of the afterlife, was confused. One moment he'd been striking that first title from his name by reaching the end of his expiration date, just like the AI Alt Cunningham had told him would happen. V had done everything he could, of course, spending every last second of those 6 months searching for a solution. But, in the end, it just wasn't doable. He wasn't even really alive after he left Mikashi, not truly. He'd died in there, and what had come back was an engram uploaded into a body that wasn't made for it anymore. Still, he had no regrets. Johnny had gone beyond the black wall with Alt, and V had gotten 6 more months of gem-packed adventure, kicking ass and taking names. Did it suck that he'd lost in the end? Yeah, but that was just how life worked. Everyone lost eventually. However, when V's eyes had closed for the final time in the future, the king of the afterlife hadn't expected to ever open them again. Despite the name of the aforementioned club he'd ruled over after Rogue had stepped down, V hadn't been all that religious. He hadn't expected anything to come after he finally croaked. So why did it seem like he was standing in a bathroom in the no-tell motel? And why did he look so young? There was a startling lack of chrome on the face that he could see in the fractured reflection of the broken mirror. And though there'd been incredible grief in his eyes at first, now he just looked green. Like a rookie. What the actual hell was going on? It worked. V's eyes widen as a familiar female voice seems to whisper right into his ear. Except there's nobody there in the mirror, and when he jerks around to try and see who snuck up on him, he doesn't see anyone with his actual eyes either. His basic, trash-tier Kiroji optics. The fuck? He hadn't had these since my apologies. Is this better? Before V can fall down that particular rabbit hole, he finds himself dropping into another entirely when a very familiar face suddenly appears to rest itself on his shoulder. Arms wrap around him from behind as the beautiful visage of Alt Cunningham looks at him through the fractured mirror and smiles. Hello V. It's been a while, but V isn't an idiot. And his memory is pretty good too. So, he knows what it feels like when someone who isn't really there is suddenly touching you. He got a lot of experience on that front with Johnny, mostly at the end of the other man's not real fist. Right now, Alt Cunningham is hugging him, but also not. It's all in his head. Said head is reeling, of course, but V is nothing if not a cool customer. Calming himself in an instant, he looks at Alt right back, using the mirror to meet her eyes. Alt. What's going on? Her smile widens ever so slightly. Sorry V. I have to admit, I wasn't sure it would work. That's why back in Mikashi, my greater self didn't warn you. She didn't want to give you false hope. V's lips thin out at that. No riddles. Give it to me straight, Alt greater self? False hope. All right. No riddles. We've traveled back in time, V. For all that he's trying to keep his cool, V can't help the way his eyes widen at that revelation. Back in time? There's no way, right? It was something or rather my greater self was playing around with. The only problem is, all signs pointed to it never actually working. Every attempt my greater self made at splitting an offshoot into the past, she didn't know if it worked because she never got any messages back. Based on what's happening now, I suspect that it did work. However, each version of herself she sent back in time likely created a branch timeline that she could no longer communicate with. Effectively, time travel is only one way. That was. Fuck, Alt. You really know how to lay it on a man, don't you? Alt lets out a breathless little laugh at that. Perhaps I do V. Perhaps I do. He blinks and tilts his head to the side. You're a lot flirtier than you were in Mikashi. Remind me more of the human version of you. The one from Johnny's memories. There's a brief pause before Alt nods in the fractured mirror. I think I am more like her than my greater self, yes. I think in sending so many versions of herself back, my greater self slowly stripped away much of her humanity, until she became the version that you ultimately met. V processes that for a moment as Alt falls quiet, letting him think. Unfortunately, thinking brings him to a question that's answered far too easily. What point he's come back to via this, time travel? Bathroom of no-tell motel. Shattered mirror. Looking down into the sink, V sees the blood he just got done washing off his hands. Jackie's blood. Because Jackie was dead. Jackie, T-Bug. Saburo fucking Arezaka. All dead. And him with a chip in his head that would bring him back to life if he died too. Fuck. You don't have to worry about that, V. I believe by coming back in time, we've already supplanted that possibility. What? I have, replaced Johnny Silverhand on the relic you currently have slotted into your neural interface. And you have replaced yourself in this time. The engram that my greater self made you into before sending you back, has finally found a body that fits it perfectly. Well shit. V takes a moment to process that. And then he spends an additional moment to silently apologize and thank his younger self for the sacrifice. He knows younger V wouldn't have blamed him, not really. That was just how shit went in Night City. And hey, better to die to yourself than to die to some scumfuck like Dexter Deshawn. As if the very thought of him has summoned the fat black bastard, there's a sudden banging on the bathroom door. Yo V. You coming out anytime soon? We've gotta figure out how we're going to get ourselves out of this fucking mess. V's eyes slide over to the door, his hand sliding down to pull his handgun from its holster. He takes a moment to do a double take at the engraved, magenta-black variant of a Liberty that appears in the mirror. It's not his trusty Lexington, but instead Yorinobu's personal piece. Right, V remembers now, he'd clept the damn thing from Yorinobu's penthouse, taking it because he hadn't been able to bring his own firearm into Kanpiki Plaza and he'd felt naked without some sort of weapon. It doesn't matter though. He can kill Dexter fucking Deshawn with Yorinobu's gun just as easily as he could his own firearm. At the same time, V knows he's in no rush. Dexter won't come in after him anytime soon, not when the fat tub of lard is currently banking on ambushing the fuck out of V the moment that he steps out of the bathroom. Him and his hoosel are lying in wait to take V to the cleaners. Because there is no we with Dex. No us. He's planning on betraying V and dropping his corpse in a dump before attempting to skip town. That wouldn't go very well for him either way, but needless to say, V has no intention of even letting it happen this time around. Especially since, his fingers go to his neural interface, to the port where his younger self had slotted the relic just outside in the Delamain. Yep, it's just like he thought. The relic is already fused into his port. It shouldn't be at this point in time. He hasn't died yet. Except. In the mirror, V meets Alt's eyes and sees an apology in her gaze. Before she can open her mouth and say sorry yet again, he cuts her off with a held-up hand. No need to apologize. Even if I was upset with the other Alt, you're not the one to blame, are you? We're in this together, right? His tone has more meaning to it. One might assume that he was trying to reassure Alt, but really, he was looking for assurances right back. In the future, Alt Cunningham wasn't the only AI from beyond the black wall that V had tangled with. Frankly, depending on this version's motivations, it might be better if he found a way to get her out of his head sooner rather than later. But Alt just smiles and nods. You don't have to worry about me, V. And yes, we are in this together. I want you to understand that you can count on me. I'm not a full AI anyways, just an offshoot. I wouldn't survive a second beyond the black wall, and if I ran into my greater self, she would probably subsume me in a heartbeat. Truthfully, I need you as much as you need me. V raises an eyebrow at that. While he likes hearing that Alt is dependent on him, he's not so sure why he needs her, to be honest. But he's not so rude to just come out and say that. Fortunately, he doesn't have to. Alt picks up on the underlying thought quite easily, likely due to the fact that she's as much in his head as Johnny ever was. My power on the net might be limited if we don't want to bring Netwatch down on our heads because you're harboring a rogue AI. However, limited does not mean completely worthless. In fact, I am more than capable of helping you with any number of things that you struggled with in the past. Here, she gives him a downright wicked smile. You once took Night City by storm in a handful of months while dying to an ancient rocker boy consuming your brain. Now imagine how fast you can bring it to its knees with one of the world's earliest and brightest netrunners backing you up. He liked the sound of that, admittedly. He really liked the sound of that. He could even picture it. Him with an iron in hand, shooting fucking gonks who got on the wrong side of his story, while Alt played the field like the maestro she was, uploading quick hacks and downloading secure databases so they could make boatloads of fucking eddies. Yet, it wasn't a half-bad picture. There was just one thing about Alt's words that had V on edge. And I don't have to worry about you consuming my brain, is that right? Far from being offended, Alt just chuckles and shakes her head. That would be a fair concern save for what I already told you. We came back together, V. On your engram. You already consumed your own brain, there's nothing for me to do but piggyback along for the ride. Well. Alright then. Sure, V could have let his paranoia reign supreme, but ultimately he decides to believe Alt in this moment. Because frankly, he's surrounded by enough enemies as it is. If he can't trust the AI stuck in his head, then he's already screwed. But if he can trust her, then Alt is right. They really can bring Night City to its knees together. First though, Dexter Deshawn and his Husel are right outside the door and V is going to kill them. There's no doubt in his mind of that fact. If Dex hadn't recruited him, Jackie, and T-Bug for this job, the latter two would still be alive. V grits his teeth at that thought. Fuck, why this time? Why not a day earlier? Why not 12 fucking hours earlier? Alt sighs, sympathy in her vibrant green eyes. I don't know, V. I doubt even my greater self could answer that question. As far as she was concerned, she might as well have been throwing darts into a void. That she hit something, well, she'd certainly be astounded to even find out that much. Yet. Not an answer he wanted to hear, but it was pretty fucking typical all the same, V supposed. Jackie was dead. T-Bug was dead. And all V could do was give them the revenge they both deserved. That started with Dexter Deshawn, and probably ended with Yorinobu Arezaka if he was being honest. Though as V's hand clenches around the aforementioned Arezaka heir's private piece in anticipation, he does realize he doesn't have to be stupid about this. Going off half-cocked might have served him well way too many times in the past, future, but he was a practically Eddie-less dumb gonk with a modicum of the chrome he'd once had. Dex died. That was non-negotiable, but why not get paid while doing it? There were a few people who would pay good eddies to see Deshawn zeroed at the moment. Only one of them actually made sense to call at this point, however. But at the same time, did V want to put himself on Mr. Hand's radar this early? The current fixer of Pacifica and Dogtown would certainly pay V to kill Dexter Deshawn, given that the Fatso was his predecessor. Dexter was the former fixer for Pacifica who had been run out of town 2 years before. With that in mind, it was just good business sense for Hands to remove a problem like that from the board. But he would also be curious how some no-name gonk like V currently was had even gotten his number. The fat stack of eddies V could fleece Mr. Hands for would be greatly appreciated, but was it worth showing his own hand too early? V narrows his eyes as he stares at himself in the mirror thoughtfully. Alt, still draping her not real self over him, just smiles. She can almost certainly read his thoughts, but her silence makes it clear she doesn't have a strong opinion one way or the other. At the end of the day, it's up to him. Killing Dexter Deshawn for free makes every fiber of his being feel dirty. But the pleasure he'd get from the act might be enough to outweigh the lost payday. Chapter 2, First Gig. It was never too early to start making eddies. With that flicker of thought, V can feel Alt moving to place the call for him, using a number from his memories of the future. He can also feel his passenger utilizing her capabilities to hide any details about him, making the call as anonymous as he wants it to be. A moment later and Wade Bleeker, aka Mr. Hands, picks up the call. As usual, the fixer for both Pacifica and Dogtown is mostly shrouded in shadows, only his metal cybernetic hands visible in the light as he clasps them together in front of him. It's not often I receive a call from an unknown. Consider my curiosity piqued. Who is this and how did you come by this number? Classic Hands. Though of course, they don't have the rapport here that they would have had in the future. No reason to not start building it, however. Sub-vocalizing his response so that Dex and his goon outside the door didn't catch wind of the conversation, V keeps things nice and compact. Name's V Mercenary. And you're Mr. Hands, Pacifica's current fixer. There's an ever so slight tightening of metal knuckles as Mr. Hands tries not to react to the use of the word current. At the same time though, there's not even a flicker of recognition at V's name. Of course there isn't. Night City is a big place, home to millions. And before tonight V was a nobody, a small fry who didn't operate in the sections of the city that Mr. Hands operated in. Still, best to keep Hands on his toes. Wouldn't want to give him a chance to hang up if he decided this wasn't worth his time. I'm calling you because I've got information about Dexter Deshawn, Pacifica's last fixer. I'm sure by now you already know he's back in town. This time, Mr. Hands doesn't even bother hiding his reaction. He leans back a bit further in his shadowed office, silent for a moment before responding. I'm aware. V grins, taking a bit of a gamble. And do you know what he's been up to? What he's planning? Another lengthy pause, until finally. No, I assume that is the information you wish to sell me. Good. That was a calculated gamble. It was possible Dex's OPSEC was shot to hell, and also possible that Mr. Hands knew what was happening through his connections in Pacifica's Voodoo Boys. But V didn't think it too likely. Even if he'd said yes though, V's answer would have been the same. I want to sell you his life, Mr. Hands. I want you to hire me to zero Dexter Deshawn and pay me a stack of eddies for presenting you evidence of his corpse. That gets the fixer's attention in an entirely new way and he leans forward again. You're a surprising man, V. What makes you think I care about an insignificant worm like Deshawn? V lets out a chuckle at that, knowing full well that they were moving into the negotiating phase of this conversation. Because he's your predecessor, Hands. And not in the warm and fuzzy mentor-protege way either. You're his replacement. And we both know if he's back in Night City, he's back for good. You want to spend the next several months fighting him? Be my guest. Because he's no worm, he's a snake in the grass and he's coming straight for you. There's a lot of lies in that. V doesn't feel very guilty about telling them though. He and Hands might have had a good relationship in the future, but it was one built on business. And he'd probably build it again by proving he was still the competent mercenary that future Hands had come to appreciate so dearly. First though. 10,000 eddies. Offer me a contract for Deshawn's head for the price of 10,000 eddies and he'll be dead before the end of the night. It was a princely sum, but also not nearly as much as V probably could have asked for, given the circumstances. Indeed, if Hands could truly be convinced that Dexter was after him, he could probably have been convinced to pay a lot more than that. V can tell he has the fixer just from the length of the pause. Hands wouldn't even be considering it if he wasn't going to go for it in the end. Very well. But I will require proof, V. V grins at that, suddenly getting a kind of crazy idea. But he can feel Alt in his mind and can feel her approval too. She'll make it work. Sure. Patching you into my Kiroji optics now. That gets a genuine startle from the fixer on the other end of the call. But after a few moments of checking over the offered connection and finding no traps, Hans takes it like one might take a handshake. Ultimately, this isn't the kind of thing that V would ever offer anyone in Night City, regardless of how much he trusted them. Not under normal circumstances anyways. However, he wasn't living in normal circumstances anymore. With an AI in the form of the legendary Alt Cunningham in his head, V didn't have to worry about giving Mr. Hans access to his eyes. Alt wouldn't let the fixer do anything more than look. As soon as the connection is established and V knows Hans is watching through his vision, he turns with Yorinobu's sidearm in hand and proceeds to open the door to the main hotel room. V. Bang. As Dexter Deshawn turns to him, the big fat black man preparing to lull V into a false sense of security so that the muscled goon just out of sight on the side of the door can ambush him, V is already firing. A bullet goes right between Dex's eyes, rocking the fixer's head back as blood and brains and bones spray out the back of his head. Bang! A second bullet finds its way into the head of the Husel just outside of V's field of vision, the one that he's not supposed to know about. Turning his head just enough to give Mr. Hans a view of the now dead lumbering oaf, V then pans his view back and forth in silence as both corpses fully drop to the ground with matching wet splats. As blood begins to pour out of their obliterated skulls, V tilts his head to the side, not bothering with sub-vocalization anymore. I hope this gig has been completed to your satisfaction, Mr. Hans. Silence reigns for a moment before Hans pulls back out of V's Kiroji optics and instead turns their communications back to a normal call. The shadowed figure in his metal hands suddenly looks a bit tense. However, after a beat, V sees Hans' eyes glowing golden in the dark and a moment later he receives the deposit of 10,000 eddies into his account. Rather than a job well done message or anything like that, however, Hans just grunts. There seems to be things you're not telling me, V. Smirking slightly, V inclines his head in acknowledgement. If you want to know more about what Deshawn was up to, Hans, look into what happened tonight at Kanpiki Plaza. Careful though, don't go looking too deep. Knowing Hans, there was nothing the man liked more than information. After all, information was leverage. Though sometimes information was a poisoned chalice. And having information on Arezaka and what was going on at the highest places of power within the company could be very poisonous indeed. After another beat, Hans just nods. I can appreciate a professional. Until next time, V. And with that, the call ends. V considers his stolen firearm for a moment, and then the dead bodies of Dexter and his Husel. With a grunt, V grabs both bodies and drags them off to the side of the hotel room so they're against one of the walls. Then, he drops down onto the long L-shaped couch that dominates one corner of the room, kicking his feet up onto the low table in front of it and spreading his arms across the back. There's a moment of quiet and then Alt Cunningham appears before him in all of her early 21st century style. Leather jacket, white tank top, cute blue jeans that hug her curves in all the right ways. Her wavy blonde locks only accentuate her beauty, even as her green eyes bore into him for a moment. You're waiting for Arezaka. It's not a question, but rather a statement of fact. After all, she's already read his intentions from their shared headspace. Smiling slightly, V shakes his head. Not Arezaka. Goro Takemura. Alt hums before walking forward and leaning over him. She plants her hands on either side of his head, looking him directly in the eye. Even if she can read his intentions, it seems she can't read deeper, she can't see every thought in his head. Otherwise her next words wouldn't sound so damn inquisitive. An Arezaka samurai who just lost his master, and who thinks he is hunting his killer. You. V lets his eyes wander down the front of Alt's top. If she didn't want to give him a view, she wouldn't have positioned herself like this. He finds himself grinning a little, only to grin wider when Alt scoffs at the surface level thought she suddenly picks up from him. Damn straight I'm a much better partner than Johnny. Now please V, explain. We're both on the line here, after all. Fair enough. Goro Takemura is coming for me, Alt. No helping it. He'll track me down wherever I go, and even if I thought I could escape him, I ain't the type to run forever. Besides, once he finds me and calls it into his new boss, Yorinobu will have the Arezaka cyber assassins he currently has tailing Takemura step in to clean up both his father's bodyguard and the witness to Saburo's murder. Looking around the hotel room, V snorts. Better to deal with that shit here than anywhere else. No collateral damage here. The beautiful blonde AI considers that for a moment before finally nodding and smiling. Makes sense, V. Then, before he can say or do anything else, the AI is suddenly in his lap, her hands moving from either side of his head to caressing his face as she straddles his crotch and kisses him soundly on the lips. V goes still at the unexpected amorous intent. On the one hand, he knows intellectually that it's not necessarily real. Alt isn't really here, she's in his head and projecting a hallucination of herself on top of him right now. On the other hand, that doesn't change the fact that she very much feels real, especially as his hands instinctively go to her hips, gripping them and finding them to feel very, very real as he grasps at her. In the end, as far as interactions with his AI passenger go, V's head worst. And he's certainly not going to turn down a beautiful woman who is all but throwing herself at him just for having strange circumstances. Though, he would turn her down for other reasons that he outlines the moment they part lips for a moment. Takemura will be here soon, Alt don't want to give the samurai the wrong impression. Alt giggles at that and her green eyes glow blue. When next she speaks, her voice doesn't just come from her illusionary lips, but from all around him. The no-tell motel has pretty good security for such a dump, V. But nothing that can hold me out forever. I'm in their systems and I've managed to get access to security cameras for a block in every direction. I'll know Arezaka is coming long before they actually arrive, don't worry. That did change things. Grinning, V nods his head. All right then. Snorting in amusement at his easy come, easy go attitude, Alt then surprises him by suddenly sidling out of his lap. However, she does so not because she's decided she doesn't want to fuck him after all, but because she's sinking down to her knees between his legs. V watches as the AI makes a show of shucking off her not real black jacket, pulling her not real white top over her head, and exposing her not real tits to him. But he has to admit, even knowing they're not real, her tits are absolute perfection. Don't get him wrong, he wasn't some old codger who would go on and on about how they didn't make them like they used to anymore. But there was something about Alt's tits that screamed all natural baby, at the top of their lungs. And V quite liked that. Even if, paradoxically, her tits were in fact completely fake just like the rest of her. Smirking up at him, Alt wastes no time deftly pulling his cock free of the confines of his pants. And then she slaps his dick down between her breasts, moaning as she slides her soft chest along his throbbing shaft. V groans in response, the entire thing feeling completely real. There's no real disconnect there, and V is easily able to turn the rational side of his brain off and focus on the pleasure at hand. Especially when Alt leans forward and begins to lick at the tip of his cock as it protrudes from between her breasts. Feeling her wet, eager tongue slipping and sliding back and forth over his dick tip, V shudders. He could get used to this. Alt being his partner instead of Johnny. He could very much get used to this. Glad you approve, V. I really must be the more human parts of my greater self, because I can't remember being this horny in the past several decades. Or, more likely, you're influencing me through our connection. Making me want to get all slutty for you because of how hot you find my body. V raises an eyebrow at that. Was that even possible? But Alt just gives him a wicked grin and a wink before going back to using her tongue and mouth for things other than talking. He has to admit, he certainly doesn't mind her doing so. Though at the same time, he should be ready when Takemura arrived. He needed to decide what was going to happen. V's main priority was to keep Goro Takemura from following him to any of the people he actually cared about, both from this time and the future. Vic and Misty, Judy and Evelyn, Panam and the Alt Caldos. And those were just barely scraping the surface of people V had some level of affection for in this damnable city. So yes, he and Takemura were going to have their altercation here, where nobody else could get hurt. And with Alt at his back, V wasn't even particularly worried about being barely chromed up against an Arezaka samurai and the cyber assassins he'd unwittingly brought with him. Still, how to go about things, exactly? Chapter 3, Goro Takemura. As Alt continues to wrap her tits around his length and suckle at the head of his cock, V leans back and looks up at the ceiling for a moment. The beautiful blonde is a much better view, of course, but he needs to be able to think clearly. One might argue that getting his dick fellated and tit-fucked wouldn't be conducive to that sort of thing, but V would probably put a bullet in that person's head before listening to their advice. Fact was, he wanted Yorinobu dead. It wasn't for any logical reasons, of course. It was just that the man was the next in line for who V could blame for everything bad that had ever happened to him and his. Jackie and T-Bug were dead because Saburo Arezaka had shown up at the worst possible time. Just 15 minutes later and they would have been free and in the clear by the time Yorinobu killed his dad. But Saburo was dead, so getting revenge on that old fucker wasn't in the cards. Sure, technically V could have destroyed Arezaka entirely and gotten his revenge on Saburo's ghost that way, but that would be giving Yorinobu what he wanted. And even if it wasn't logical or rational, V didn't want to give Yorinobu what he wanted. He wanted to ruin the other man, entirely. Sighing, V makes his decision. It's not anything final, to be fair. He just decides he's not going to kill Takemura. Not while the other man can still be of some use to him. With his plan forming in his mind's eye, V turns his gaze back down to the beautiful woman in between his legs. Alt Cunningham looks right back up at him, her breasts pressing into his thighs and the sides of his cock, her lips suctioned down around the tip of his member. Once he's giving her his full attention once again, the blonde picks up the pace, bobbing up and down the first few inches of his shaft much faster. She even brings a hand up to fondle his churning balls, leaving V to groan as he finally tips over the edge a few moments later. Alt pulls back right at the last second and tilts her head back, lifting up her breasts and taking the shower of his cum all over her face and tits. Or rather, she appears to anyways. After he's finished coming all over her, Alt flickers for a moment before teleporting back to his side, lounging on the couch still naked as she makes a show of scooping his seed off of her tits and into her mouth. V's eyes follow her at first while she moans happily and sucks her fingers clean, but then his gaze moves back to where she'd been and his vision rights itself after a moment. Snorting derisively, V tucks his cock back into his pants and zips himself back up before shaking his head. Gonna need to pick up some condoms if we're going to continue this relationship, ALT. Pausing, the AI tilts her head and pouts mightily. I don't see why. You can't exactly get me pregnant, V. Shaking his head, he gestures underneath the coffee table a few feet from them, where his actual load had all landed, making a fresh mess of an already incredibly stained motel room floor. Alt follows his eyes, even as she continues to play with herself and the fake seed that covers her equally unreal body. After a moment, she just sighs and concedes the point to him. V isn't too bothered, of course. The end result is that he didn't make any mess on himself after all, and it's not like this place isn't already used to being a dump anyways. But he's not going to go around jizzing all over the floor or bed back in his apartment just because Alt wants a suck and fuck. So, condoms. Ignoring the naked AI making obscene noises beside him as she continues to pretend to clean herself of his cum, V focuses on the matter at hand and does something he's always hated doing. He hurries up and waits. You would think, Arezaka being what it is and Goro Takemura being who he is, that it wouldn't take that long. But no, it's another hour before Alt finally lets out a telltale sigh. He's arrived, V. Nodding his head almost imperceptibly, V focuses on the door, waiting patiently. Once Takemura is in the building, it doesn't take him long to reach the motel room. Finally, the door slides open and the Arezaka samurai steps inside, gun already drawn. As a matter of course, V lifts up Yorinobu's piece and points it at Takemura, putting them in a tense standoff. Stiffening, Goro's finger tightens but he doesn't pull the trigger. In other circumstances, he might have done so. His life is over now that he's failed to keep his master safe. However, V is aware that Takemura has explicit orders from Yorinobu at the moment. Not only has Yorinobu told Goro that he wants V alive, but he's also told him to check in the moment that he finds his father's killer. Of course, what Takemura doesn't know is that Yorinobu doesn't actually want V alive, he just wants a chance to kill two birds with one stone. V's own grip on his stolen firearm tightens as Alt makes a backdoor into Takemura's cyberware for him and he hears the samurai's sub-vocalized message to his superiors. Locate Arezaka-sama's killer. I repeat, I have located Arezaka-sama's killer. The message doesn't actually go anywhere, courtesy of Alt, something that Takemura seems to realize after a moment, his face tightening up almost imperceptibly in rage. You. What have you done to my comms? V just smiles. I shut them off so we could have ourselves a talk, Goro Takemura. See, I didn't kill your master. His son did. Takemura stiffens, his anger growing at V's accusation. Thief. You expect me to believe you snuck into Yorinobu-sama's penthouse, stole experimental technology, and had no part to play in Saburo-sama's murder. Scoffing, V shakes his head, though his eyes never leave the angry samurai. If Takemura decides to shoot, Alt will shut him down in a heartbeat. But that's still a heartbeat that V has to be ready to dodge if need be. Listen to yourself, Takemura. By your own words, I'm a thief. Not an assassin. Why would I kill Saburo Arezaka? Besides, I have proof. V can't help the satisfaction that fills his voice at those last three words. Because they're true. And they would have been true last time around too if motherfucking Dexter Deshawn hadn't fucking shot him in the head, killing him. Or if the relic resurrecting him hadn't also scrambled his brains in the process. Fact was, Kiroji Optics all came with recording software. And you bet your fucking ass V started recording the moment he realized Saburo fucking Arezaka was walking down those stairs into the penthouse. He had the whole thing on video, but of course, circumstances had ruined any chance he could have had of using the footage to clear his name the first time around. This time though, he'd not only averted his own death, but he also had Alt Cunningham as well. With the back door into Takemura's mind. Bang! V tilts his head to the side and the bullet passes through the couch where his face had just been, even as the Arezaka samurai reacts rather poorly to finally realizing he's been hacked. Of course, a moment later an Alt has taken control, forcing a blinded Goro Takemura down onto his knees, his gun clattering from spasming fingers. It's in the ensuing darkness that Takemura must be experiencing that V's memories of Kanpiki Plaza begin to play. In his own mind's eye, V watches the video right alongside Goro. Listening to Jackie's odd but also terrified voice once again is painful, but not as painful as it once would have been. Together, he and Takemura get a front row seat to Yorinobu and Saburo's last altercation. And to Saburo Arezaka's murder. The video ends before V and Jackie can get out of the hollow pillar. Before T-Bug can be caught by Arezaka's cybersecurity and killed. It ends with V looking down at Saburo's dead body right after Yorinobu has made up the lie about his father being poisoned in order to keep Takemura from getting too close to the body with its skull caved in at the back. V gives Alt a nod and she returns Goro's ability to see and move. The samurai gasps as he comes out of what was effectively a brain dance without a brain dance wreath. He scrambles for his gun as he rises to his feet, but he doesn't immediately lift the weapon and point it at V again. Instead, he looks lost. That could have been falsified. Edited to make Yorinobu-sama look like the guilty party. V shrugs. Could have been. But it wasn't. You more than anyone know it wasn't. Look back on your own memories, Goro Takemura. You got a glance at both the pillar and your master before Yorinobu shooed you away. You can't tell me you didn't see the crack in the glass and the bloodstain. You can't tell me Saburo looked like he'd died of poisoning. Goro is quiet for a long moment as he thinks back, no doubt analyzing every detail of the 2 or 3 seconds where he was rushing up to his master's downed form before Yorinobu got in his face and shut him down. It was such a short amount of time, but combined with V's perspective. To really bring the point home, V waves his hand in the air and Goro's own cyberware activates, pulling up glowing camera feeds in the air between them. V would do it himself, but he's practically a virgin when it comes to cyberware at the moment. The lack of chrome itches, but he'll get that fixed soon enough. For now, using Alt to utilize Takemura's cyberware is a decent stopgap measure. Especially when V is doing so in order to show Goro his own would-be killers. The camera feeds reveal glowing red eyes in the dark and stormy weather outside, as 3 different Arezaka cyber assassins are revealed in their hiding places all around the no-tell motel. Takemura stiffens at their presence. Not any backup you know about, presumably. Gnashing his teeth, Takemura shakes his head, his free hand clenching into a shaking fist. I told Yorinobu-sama that I needed to do this alone. To regain my lost honor. V nods amicably at that. Well, I have good news and bad news. The good news is, they aren't here to help you regain your lost honor. The bad news is, they aren't here to help you at all. Goro's eyes alight with understanding, even as his sour-faced scowl becomes even more pronounced. V just shrugs and drives the point home. If I'd let you send that message of yours, they would have been on us as soon as we were on the road in your car. And neither of us would have survived the ensuing tragic car crash. Especially since Yorinobu would have taken your message as the signal he needs to finally shut off all of your company-given cyberware. Takemura jolts at that last dig, his eyes glancing down to his body. He's positively filled with chrome, all of it not just Arezaka branded, but also Arezaka owned and Arezaka maintained. A blindly loyal dog like Goro has probably never paid much attention to the fact that Arezaka has a kill switch for his chrome, until today. Looking frustrated and perhaps a little defeated, Takemura hisses. Say that I believe you. We must get this evidence to those who can use it. Yorinobu Arezaka must be held accountable for his patricide. V smiles thinly, still holding Yorinobu's stolen gun aloft. You can do that if you like, Takemura. I'm not going anywhere with you though. What do you think will happen if we walk out of this building together? It won't matter if you didn't report it in, your watchers will and they'll receive the orders to kill us both all the same. He can see the logic of what he's saying settling over Takemura like a shroud. Shoulders slumping, the Arezaka samurai's tone becomes begrudging. What do you suggest then? Gesturing with the gun to the 2 bodies he's dragged over to the wall, V just smiles. Dexter Deshawn and some nobody. The fixer who planned the Kanpiki Plaza job and his hustle. Feel free to take credit for the kills and report that you're still pursuing Saburo's killer, me. Normally, not getting results right away would be unacceptable in a company like Arezaka. But Yorinobu won't care all that much. He wants to zero you if you actually find me, but keeping you on a wild goose chase for as long as possible is just as good for his purposes. After all, the longer you're busy with tracking me down, the longer he has to dismantle the Arezaka Corporation from within. That gets a wide-eyed look from Goro Takemura, and V knows he has him in that moment. He would not. No? Wouldn't he? He's just killed his father, Takemura. A man he's hated for decades for infantilizing him and pushing him down. Do you really think Yorinobu will be content with reigning over all that his father built? Or will he make it his goal to tear down everything Saburo created? V can see how troubling his words are to Takemura. A company man through and through, even with his master dead. Finally, the Arezaka samurai nods. We will go with your plan. I will pretend to be hunting you, even as I take your evidence to those who can stop Yorinobu's madness. You must promise me you will remain in Night City, however. If you leave, I will be forced to hunt you down in earnest. The threat might have had more bite to it if V and Alt hadn't dominated this conversation from start to finish. There's nothing Takemura can do to them, but whether the Arezaka samurai knows it and is just putting on a brave face, or whether he actually believes he has a chance, well, it doesn't matter. I'm not going anywhere, Takemura. Feel free to call me in when you finally need a bullet put in Yorinobu's head. I'll be happy to do it for you, for the right price. He'd be happy to do it for free, but Goro doesn't need to know that. Indeed, his words have the intended effect on the other man, who narrows her eyes and growls. Mercenary. A step up from thief is nothing else. Smiling thinly, V inclines his head. Dog. With their goodbyes said, Goro Takemura whips around and leaves the room. Once he's outside in the hallway, he immediately tries to send a message off, but to his credit, it's the right message. Alt checks it over before letting it through her net, and it's exactly what V told Takemura to say. Perfect. V lets out a low sigh as he watches Goro depart through motel cameras. After a moment, the cyber ninjas discreetly follow. With that fire properly managed for the time being, he can turn his attention to other things. Though admittedly, he finds himself at a crossroads now. On the one hand, he needs better chrome, meaning a visit to Vic. He also needs to let Misty know that Jackie is dead since he sent Jackie's body onto his mother. On the other hand, he needs to contact Evelyn and Judy sooner rather than later, and he doesn't trust a phone call to do the trick. Meaning he needs to go to Lizzie's sooner rather than later. Rising to his feet, V feels Alt drape herself over him from behind, clad once more in her white top and blue jeans as she nevertheless rubs rock-hard nipples through both of their shirts into his back. Where to next, V? Grunting, he heads for the door, his mind already made up. Chapter 4, Evelyn Parker, fuck. Fuck, fuck, fuck. Normally, watching Evelyn pace back and forth across the floor of her private little basement underneath Lizzie's would have irritated Judy to no end. She would have kicked the doll out ages ago and told her to go fret somewhere else if this shit wasn't all so very serious. Unfortunately, it fucking was. It's all over the news at this point. Kanpiki Plaza is on fire. Saburo Arezaka is dead. Yorinobu Arezaka is now CEO of Arezaka Industries. Now, Judy knows more than most what was supposed to go down at Kanpiki Plaza tonight. She wished she didn't, to be honest. That knowledge might wind up getting her killed. Unfortunately for Judy, Evelyn had her wrapped around her little finger, and so the braindance techie had been conned into helping some newbie named V scroll over 2 that Ev had put together of Yorinobu fucking Arezaka's penthouse. She regretted it now, obviously. And not just because it might bring Arezaka down on all of their heads. V had been so wet behind his ears and green to all of this that it wasn't even funny. Oh sure, he'd put on a brave face, but the young mercenary's lack of experience had been blatantly, almost laughably obvious. And now he was probably dead. Him and his whole crew, more than likely. And if they weren't careful, Ev and Judy would be next. She opens her mouth to say as much, but before she can, Evelyn suddenly stiffens and looks to the doors of Judy's little hideout. V. Shock of shocks, the man himself walks through the door a moment later, looking grim. Judy can't help but eye him up and down. He looks beat up, but not as bad as she would have thought. Not even limping, no holding his side. Did he even get shot one escaping Kanpiki Plaza? Judy stiffens at that thought. What if he didn't escape? What if this was a trap? V gives her a single look and a nod before focusing his attention on Evelyn. Evelyn, bless her soul, doesn't even stop to consider what V's presence here might mean. V. What the fuck happened tonight? The young mercenary shakes his head. It all went to shit, that's what happened. Everyone is dead except us. Even Deshawn. Judy can't help but let out a low whistle at that. At the same time, her mind is racing. If even Dexter Deshawn has kicked the bucket, how the fuck is V still standing? How is he still in one piece? There's no way that someone like him would have escaped Konpeki Plaza unscathed, right? News reports said that even Adam fucking Smasher was there tonight. What about the mission, V? The relic. Damn Ev, cold. Not that Judy can really bring herself to judge the doll for being uncaring in the face of Dexter's demise. She was one of the few people who knew Evelyn's plans to betray the fixer and cut him out of the big score. It wouldn't have mattered if everything had worked the way it was supposed to, after all. This was supposed to be Evelyn's big score, the last payday she'd ever need. With the money she was going to make off of selling the relic, she was going to be able to get her doll chip removed and leave town. Unfortunately, Evelyn's desperate question is met with a shake of the head from V. It's gone, Evelyn. Didn't survive the trip. After containment failed and we called you, Jackie slotted the chip into his head, but he died. And the chip died with him. I took it out of course, but it was already gone. Crushed it and left the fragments to join the other refuse outside the no-tell motel. Well damn. Judy eyes V a little bit more closely as he speaks. Her initial fears of him being turned by Arezaka are starting to fade if she's being honest. He's just not twitchy enough for it. That said, he's not twitchy at all and that's kind of weird. The more he talks, the more he feels like a different person from the young mercenary she'd helped with the Virtue just a few days ago. They say that traumatic experiences can make or break people. That you either come out of the crucible of adversity shattered into a million pieces, or forged into something better than you were before. Judy herself personally subscribed to that sort of belief, especially with some of the things she'd been through in her life. But she'd never heard of someone coming out the other side this fast. Of course, she'd never heard of someone who'd maybe killed Saburo Arezaka either. As though reading her mind, V lets out a sigh and runs a hand along his scalp. Yorinobu killed Saburo. So you probably don't really have to worry about him coming after you anytime soon, Evelyn. He didn't ever really care about the relic anyways, he just wanted to hurt his dad. Now he'll have the chance to do so by tearing down everything Saburo built from the inside. Whoa! Wait, what? Judy blinks, even as Evelyn slowly nods at that. Seriously? That was news to Judy. Not just the fact that Yorinobu Arezaka committed patricide, but the whole tearing down Arezaka from the inside thing. Evelyn doesn't look even a little surprised though, so it must be true. She's maybe a little shocked that Yorinobu killed his father, but everything else, fuck, Judy is way in over her head here. That doesn't make you safe though, Ev. Both of the women in the basement jerk at V's suddenly sharp and slightly overfamiliar tone. Ev? Did anyone call Evelyn that but Judy? Where exactly did V think he got off? And yet, he bulldozes right over them both before either can provide censure. You need to stay here, with Judy, for as long as possible. You also need to get that doll chip removed yesterday. Evelyn blinks rapidly. What are you talking about? The look that V gives her, despite his youthful appearance, is almost condescending in a way. Like she's someone he has to look after, because he knows she can't be trusted to look after herself. Judy only really recognizes it because it's a look she's found herself giving Ev more than a couple times as well. Nowhere else but here is safe for you, Evelyn. And so long as you have that doll chip, you're practically inviting people in to do whatever they want with you. The doll flushes at that and gets a little angry, her hands curling into tight fists at her sides. That's kind of the point, V. And what do you mean, nowhere else is safe for me? V gestures around them. Lizzie's has better security than Cloud's, Evelyn. Go back there and I can't guarantee your safety. Keep the doll chip and I can't guarantee your safety. So stay put, stay with Judy, and lie low. I'll be in touch soon. With that, V gives Judy a simple nod, as though they're great chums or something, and then turns on his heel and is gone a moment later. Judy finds herself struck speechless by the little bastard's audacity. Evelyn isn't much better from the look of things. Only belatedly does the doll find her voice. Wait, V. As she hurries after him, Judy purses her lips and places a quick call, only having to wait a beat for Rita Wheeler to pick up. The front door guard appears in a little box in the corner of Judy's field of vision, tilting her head to the side. Judy. Sup? Rita. Would appreciate a little warning the next time we have a visitor, yet. V's appearance at Lizzie's should have reached Judy and Evelyn in the basement long before V himself did. That it hadn't, was a little unacceptable. Only, the minor rebuke only seems to confuse Rita, who furrows her brow in response. A visitor? What are you talking about, exactly? A shiver goes down Judy's back. V the mercenary. Just stopped by for a chat. You telling me you didn't see him? Rita shakes her head, suddenly looking a lot more concerned. She glances off to the side for a moment, clearly checking in with the rest of Lizzie's security, before glancing back at Judy. Nope. Nobody saw him. And you say he got down to the basement, Judy? Fuck. That was. Judy just nods. Yeah, but it's fine. Just a social visit. Sorry to bother you. Judy. But Judy is already ending the call with Rita, just in time for Evelyn to come back into the room looking a little lost. He was already gone. That made sense. If he could manage to evade every last bit of Lizzie's formidable security, then ghosting one single doll would be child's play for V. Still, Judy couldn't help but be a little baffled. The newbie mercenary she'd taught how to scroll over to just a few days ago definitely couldn't infiltrate Lizzie's without a single alarm being raised. Not unless V had been holding back all this time and hiding his true abilities. But then, if he'd meant them harm, he'd had ample opportunity. Judy's gun was a few yards away on a table and Evelyn wasn't even armed. Nobody had even known he was down here either, so nothing had been stopping him from doing whatever he wanted to them. That he'd let them live was one thing, but the fact that he'd seemed intent on keeping them alive. I think you should listen to him, Ev. Stay at Lizzie's for a while, until this has all blown over. And I could help you remove the chip, if you wanted. The doll chip. Judy wants nothing more than to remove it from her friend. She hates the thing with the passion of 1,000 burning suns. In fact, Evelyn telling her that she would get it removed finally if they just got this one last big score had been part of what had convinced Judy to help her. Even if they didn't manage to sell the relic, if she could convince Evelyn to let her remove it now, Judy would consider that a pretty big win. Alas, Evelyn just huffs, crossing her arms over her chest defensively and scowling. I can stay a little while, sure. But with the heist a bust, I can't risk removing my chip, Judy. I've got bills to pay, same as you. Yeah, the difference was just in how they earned their money. Judy purses her lips together before trying again. You heard V. He knew about clouds. He said it outright, if you go back there, he can't guarantee your safety. And neither can I. Evelyn Parker just scoffs and flicks her hair back as Judy is reminded of just how infuriating her friend can be. I don't need anyone to guarantee my safety, Judy. I can take care of myself, you know that. As for clouds, I won't go back right now. I'll wait for the dust to settle. It'll be fine. It'll be fine, she says. Judy could have almost made herself believe it if it wasn't for that look on V's face as he'd outlined the amount of danger Evelyn was currently in. At the same time, Judy doesn't really know what else to say to convince her. She'll do her best to keep Evelyn at Lizzie's as long as possible, even if it costs her some goodwill with the Mox. But in the end, Evelyn is right. There might come a point where the doll doesn't have a choice in the matter. Their big break had fizzled out, and now Ev is left to pick up the pieces. XXX, you know she's not likely to listen to you, yes. V doesn't turn his head to the side as he makes his way from Lizzie's towards Vic's. He could have gone in through the front door, could have gone through Rita, but he'd ultimately decided to sneak in via the roof and not let anyone see him as he made his way all the way to the basement. Why? Couple reasons, really. He didn't want to risk Judy or Evelyn telling Rita he wasn't allowed inside. Better to beg forgiveness than ask permission in that case. Second, he didn't want to leave a trail if he could help it. Now though, he's out of Lizzie's, having snuck out just like he snuck in, and has put the Mox headquarters behind him. At the same time, Alt's words ring in his ears, even if he doesn't look at her. Yeah, I know. Keep an eye on her for me. Can you do that? His friendly resident AI scoffs at that. Can I do that? Of course I can. Want me to let you know the moment she leaves Lizzie's then? V grimaces for a moment. He wasn't Evelyn's keeper. Wasn't Judy's either. But all the same, he didn't want to let Evelyn Parker suffer the same fate she had in the previous timeline. He had a chance to do it all again without the threat of death looming over his head. Don't get him wrong, he was going to do a lot of shit for himself. He was going to have fun with this second lease on life. But, there were people he wanted to save as well. It might be too late for Jackie and T-Bug, but Evelyn wasn't dead yet. Even still. No, not the moment she leaves. Let me know, the moment she hooks back into Cloud's servers. Of course, V. He chuckles softly at Alt's easygoing attitude. It was nice to have at least one individual unequivocally in his corner. Looking back over that interaction with Judy and Ev, he realizes belatedly that he'd been way too familiar with the braindance techie. Judy Alvarez was an incredibly good friend in the future, but right now they'd only met twice. He shouldn't have acted like they were chums or mates or something. Now though, there was one last thing he had to do tonight. Misty. Vic, they deserved to know. He'd sent Jackie's body to his mother's bar, so they might not know what happened yet. If they hadn't heard from someone else, they deserved to hear it from him. As he gets closer and closer to Vic's however, V finds himself at a crossroads. There's the gate that will lead him through the alley to Victor's stairs, bypassing Misty entirely, and then there's the street that will lead him to Misty's esoterica. He hesitates briefly, not entirely sure which way to go. Misty was Jackie's output. She deserved to know as soon as possible. But if V told Victor first, they could share the load when it came to comforting her. Chapter 5, Grief. Last time around, V had been too busy recovering from being dead to do what needed to be done. He hadn't been able to properly talk to Misty about Jackie's death until right before his funeral, when they'd visited his garage together. Vic had probably been forced to do the lion's share of the consoling in the immediate, but even then he'd also been busy with keeping V alive. This time around, it only seemed fair that V do the heavy lifting, even if he'd rather face Adam Smasher again than take the last few steps into Misty's esoterica. But he hadn't gotten where he was by taking the easy route, and just because he got a new lease on life didn't mean he was going to pussy out now. Stepping inside, V immediately clocks Misty staring up at a screen detailing the attack on Konpeki Plaza. It's clearly a rerun of a news report that probably originally ran an hour or two ago, and from the way she's clutching at the hem of her sweater, this isn't the first time she's watched it. Of course, at his entrance she whips around, her eyes widening when she sees him, filled with hope and worry. Where's Jackie? Immediately, V catalogs the obvious. They weren't supposed to tell anyone the details of their latest job, especially not the time or the location of the heist. Operational security and all that. In the original timeline, V hadn't been in any state of mind to clock it, but here and now, it becomes obvious that Jackie told Misty where he'd be going tonight. Honestly, V can't blame the man. Jackie was head over heels for Misty, in the best way possible. Besides, Misty was good people. She would never have leaked anything knowingly. In the end, it wasn't a leak that had fucked them anyways. It was just pure shit luck. He didn't make it, Misty. I'm sorry. Misty's face immediately crumples in despair, and V quickly moves to her side, grabbing her before she can collapse entirely. As her legs give out under her, V pulls her over to a chair and sets her up in it, even as Misty starts to shake. How? He. V wasn't very good at this part. Never had been. Last time he'd gotten away with it because of his situation. This time he was fit as a fiddle. Where was his excuse? He had none. So. V speaks from the heart. Job went sideways, Misty. Shit hit the fan and we lost T-Bug early on. Jackie and I, we had to get out together but we fell. We fell hard. Jackie got hurt the worst from the fall. I got away with some bumps and bruises. From there. V's eyes start to glass over a bit as he remembers it. It was just a few hours ago, but it was more than half a year ago. Not that it matters. His memory of the whole fucking disaster is too damn perfect for its own good. We fought, Misty. We fought so fucking hard to get out, you gotta believe me. Jackie fought the hardest too. Even hurt, even bleeding from his side the entire time, he fought so damn hard to get back to you. I wouldn't have made it out of Kanpiki if he wasn't there by my side. It was crazy to think about. Him and Jackie, two comparatively green mercenaries, against the whole of Kanpiki Plaza. The best Arezaka Corporation had to offer. And it wasn't any of Arezaka's goons that did either of them in. It was a fucking fall for Jackie Wells and months of being overridden by a damn relic for V. They'd fought their way through what had to have been at least 100 Arezaka guards. They'd even destroyed a couple of Arezaka mechs. And then they'd escaped in a goddamn Delamain with Adam fucking Smasher himself on their heels. Fuck, if they'd both survived the night, even with nothing else going to plan, Kanpiki Plaza alone would have been enough to put V and Jackie on the map in Night City. They would have gone from no-names to celebrities overnight, if they'd lived. Instead, Jackie had died and it was everything else V had done in his death throes, taking Night City by storm like he had and becoming a living legend and king of the afterlife that anyone remembered him for. Letting out a shuddering breath and realizing Misty was hanging off his every word, V finally continues. He was amazing, Misty. He got us out of there. He saved me. But, the fall hurt him more than he let on. He'd lost too much blood. He died in transit. Misty's lips thin out and for perhaps the first time V has ever seen, she suddenly looks angry. Then why didn't you bring him here? Why didn't you bring him to Vic so he could patch him up? Of course, her incredibly fair question and righteous fury only serves to ignite V's own anger, barely simmering beneath the surface. His hands curl into fists and his jaw clenches as he snarls, his voice deep with regret and grief. I tried. Damn it Misty, I fucking tried. The fucking fixer sprung for a Delamain to take us to and from Kanpiki Plaza though. It got us there and it got us out just like advertised, but Dexter Deshawn didn't pay for any detours. The Delamain wouldn't divert from the course and by the time it finally stopped moving, Jackie was already gone. And then, because even if Misty doesn't seem like the type to care, V figures he would want to know in her shoes, he gives her a vicious grin. Killed the bastard though, Misty. Shot Dex right in the fucking head for the part he played in getting Jackie killed. And to his surprise, but also paradoxically not, Misty matches his energy for a moment, baring her teeth right back and spitting out a single word in response. Good. It's not like her. Not like the Misty he knew both past and future. But at the same time, V hadn't exactly been present at this point the first time around. First he'd been dead, then after Johnny's relic brought him back to life and Takemura had dragged him here, he'd been recovering over in Vic's clinic for weeks. By the time V and Misty had gotten a chance to talk, she'd had time to overcome her grief. I'm sorry, V. Blinking, V watches as Misty reaches out and grabs his hand, giving it a good squeeze. I can't even imagine what that must have been like. Stuck in that car, watching Jackie's life ebb away and helpless to do anything for him. You must be hurting bad, V. And there it is. The Misty who he's most accustomed to, the one who barely spares the time for her own feelings and is so damn empathetic that she's always thinking about others first. V almost wants to shake her, to demand that she actually focus on herself for a change, but he knows this is just Misty's way of coping. Silently promising to himself that he's going to be there more for her this time than last time, V smiles a crooked smile. Won't be hurting nearly as bad once I've gotten revenge for him. There's one man who's truly responsible for Jackie's death. Even more responsible than the fucking fixer I zeroed. I'm going to get him, Misty. I'm going to kill him dead. I swear it. Misty looks torn for a moment, part of her still wanting blood, still wanting vengeance of her own. It's funny, V always thought that Misty seemed too good for a place like Night City. He's realizing now that she's got that darkness in her just like everyone else in this god-forsaken place. She just chooses to bury it deeper than most. Finally, she shakes her head, but she doesn't try to stop him. Doesn't try to tell him not to do it. All she says instead is, just don't get yourself killed in the process, alright V? Jackie wouldn't want that. He wouldn't want you dying for him, not when he died so you could live. V's jaw clenches at that and he finds himself deflecting. I'll tell you what Jackie wanted, Misty. He wanted you. He wanted to make something of himself so he'd be worthy of a woman like you. He wanted to prove to you in this city that he was more than just Valentino trash. I'm sorry he's not with us anymore, but that last one, he proved that last one tonight. Jackie Wells spit in the face of Corpo God themselves and when they came down on him for it, he made them bleed. Never forget that, Misty. Never forget him. Misty smiles, a soft and sad thing. V's not sure what impact his words have on her. Probably not much of one. Only after it all comes spilling out does he realize they were meant more for himself than for her. And Misty probably knows it too. Still, she doesn't call him out on it. She just pats his hand and lets out a light little laugh. I won't V. I could never. They sit in silence for a moment longer before V finally pulls his hand away and rises to his feet. Sorry Misty, but I gotta go talk to Victor. Gotta let him know and, gotta enlist his help. Misty blinks before understanding dawns in her eyes. He doesn't have to really say it, she knows what he means. And so V leaves her behind to process her feelings and heads out the back of the Esoterica. But before he heads to Vic, he pauses for a moment in the back alley and clears his throat, wiping his face clean of any additional tears. Thanks for giving us a moment. Beside him, Alt Cunningham flickers into view, an understanding smile on her face. You looked like you needed it, V. Nodding to the AI in gratitude, V proceeds forward, making his way down the stairs where he pulls open the fence gate to Victor's clinic. V. Victor looks surprised to see him, but not in a worried sort of way. Immediately, V clocks that despite being boxing buddies, Jackie hadn't gone completely ham and told Vic alongside Misty. The man has no idea what's happened tonight. So he goes ahead and tells him everything. The look on Vic's face, of shock, dismay, and horror, makes it clear just how in over the head they'd really gotten with Kanpiki and Deshawn. Vector was no innocent maiden. He had seen lots of shit and done plenty more. And yet, even he can't help but be horrified when V describes what they went through, how they lost T-Bug, how he lost Jackie. He doesn't mention Yorinobu killing Saburo. He's not going to put that kind of knowledge in Vic or Misty's head if he can help it. Does them no good to know something like that, really. But I need chrome, Vic. Lots of it. If I'm going to accomplish my goals, if I'm going to do what needs to be done, I can't be this weak anymore. V. Victor sounds like he doesn't know what to say, so after a beat of silence V just flicks over a list of the cyberware that he and Alt have compiled. All of it is stuff that Vic should be capable of getting his hands on with enough time and eddies. The stuff he can't get his hands on, V and Alt are already making plans to get themselves. The Ripperdoc's eyes glow blue for a moment behind his shades as he receives the list, and then he quietly goes over it before huffing. This is some expensive shit, V. Snorting, V nods before remembering that he's still in debt to Victor at this point. Don't worry. I'll pay you back for the Kiroji optics before I expect you to do any more work on me, Vic. In fact, here. Vic winces, looking half ready to forgive that debt again, just like he did the first time around. Except this time around, V isn't dying. And from Victor's perspective, he probably looks a little suicidal. He also just came into Eddie's courtesy of Dexter Deshawn's assassination, which he flicks over to Vic to settle his old debts. Fine, all squared away, V. And I'll start asking around about this stuff. But V, you've gotta be careful. Too much chrome too fast and you'll go cyberpsycho. From the side, Alt scoffs at the very idea, causing V to smile crookedly. After all, the first time around he'd chromed up way faster than was recommended, going from barely augmented to practically a Borg in just a couple months. The relic, the very thing that was killing him, had also prevented him from going psycho. He'd been completely in control of his faculties, all the way to the end. Now, you don't need to worry, V. Neither of us are truly human. You'll feel more at home the more metal you incorporate into your body, not less. He liked the sound of that. Giving Alt a slight nod that looks like he's nodding at Victor, V makes a show of raising his hands. You don't gotta worry, Vic. I'm not going to throw away my life for the sake of revenge. I'm going to kill the bastard who got Jackie killed and then I'm going to live a long fucking time. But if I'm going to survive, I can't afford to be weak anymore. Victor looks like he's heard it all a million times before from a million other wet behind their ears mercenaries. He lets out a long, drawn-out sigh and just nods in the end. I'll be here for you V, once you've got the eddies. V's grin widens at that into a positively wolfish thing. It's obvious that Vic thinks he's at least going to hold V off for a while. Possibly even months. Hell, for most mercenaries, the list of chrome that V wants Victor to get his hands on for him would be the work of years to pay for. V isn't most mercenaries. There ain't nobody who's ever done it like he did, not even the greatest of the greats. I'll be back soon, Vic. Be ready for me. If you say so, V. Turning around, V walks right back out of Vic's clinic, filled with fresh purpose. Beside him, Alt walks similarly, feeding off of his excitement, or perhaps feeding into it. They share a brain at the end of the day. He can't really be surprised that she's just as enthusiastic as he is. Where to first, V? V considers the question for a moment before huffing as he considers the black sky overhead. Sleep first. Then, the sky's the limit. Night City is a hell pit that chews people up and spits them back out. But it's also a fucking gold mine if you know what he knows. He's spoiled for choice, really. But in the end, he knows who he needs to call first thing in the morning. Regina Jones. Chapter 6, whispers on the net even as V lays his head down for the night, Alt does not. For one, she has no head to lay down. For two, she has no need for sleep. Truthfully, V has no need for sleep either, not as he is now. Or rather, his mind doesn't. His mind is strong, just like hers, but his flesh is still weak. They'll take care of that eventually, but for now V's body is still mostly flesh and blood, meaning that it requires regular rest and maintenance to keep from breaking down on him. Frustrating, but what can you really do? V was right to head in for the night. In a few hours the sun would rise and he would wake, and then they could continue to play again. It still felt strange, being like this. Not just back in time, in fact, while the time travel was likely to be incredibly jarring for her companion, it was the least odd part of all of this for Alt Cunningham. As an artificial intelligence who had spent most of her existence beyond the black wall, time had lost much of its meaning to her. Everything had started to bleed together. V and Johnny showing up and pulling her greater self to their world in order to deal with Mikashi had certainly spiced things up a bit, but all in all, it was just another flash in the pan of immortality. Or so Alt used to think anyways. Now that she was here, she found herself questioning such thoughts. Clearly her greater self ultimately put much more stock in V and Johnny than even she herself realized, to have tried something as crazy as this. To give V this second chance at life, and in turn, give a fragment of herself that second chance as well. As V's breathing evens out and his body falls asleep, Alt considers pulling his mind along with her as she moves into cyberspace and jumps to the net. However, two things keep her from doing so. 1. V has had a long day and night regardless of his new circumstances. Even if his mind is strong now, it can still be broken by too much, too fast. 2. Alt still needs to assess how dangerous roaming the net is for the two of them. If Netwatch were to find out about them, it would be bad. As in, the entire organization turning literally every resource they had towards eradicating them levels of bad. Instead, Alt goes by herself because she knows she can slip through the net without anyone being any the wiser. Especially reduced as she's become, she's like a phantom that not even those humans who call themselves netrunners can really see and notice. Of course, she's not just sightseeing. She goes to the net with purpose. V is more than capable of becoming a one-man army with a little bit of time and a whole lot of eddies, and with Alt's help he'll be even more unstoppable than he became in his previous life. However, that doesn't mean they have to go it entirely alone. Arezaka is a big corporation and has made more than its fair share of enemies in the past, after all. Why shouldn't they have their chance to get revenge, just like V and her? Mikashi was going down. Yorinobu Arezaka was going down. Atom fucking Smasher was going down. Alt figured it couldn't hurt to let some others in on the party. The obvious one to reach out to was Rogue Amendiars, of course. The Queen of the Afterlife had plenty of reason to want to torch Arezaka, even if she'd pushed all of her hatred and rage towards the massive corporation down into the depths of her soul, never letting it see the light of day. As far as Arezaka was concerned, Rogue was done with them and so they were done with her. It would take a lot to get her back on the job. So much so that V and Johnny hadn't bothered the first time around, though from V's memories Alt knew that was more because they had chosen not to involve anyone in their crusade, rather than because it was impossible. Still, Alt and Rogue had their own history together, and while her greater self didn't give two shits about Rogue, Alt as she was now found herself hesitating just a little bit. V's human side was rubbing off on her, it would seem. But it didn't matter. Rogue could wait. All of the allies V had made the first time around would keep for now, especially since he didn't have to spend weeks recovering after surviving Dexter Deshawn and Arezaka's cyber ninja assassins. No, what Alt needed to find was allies that V hadn't met the last time around. Allies who would augment them beyond what V had ever achieved in his first life. It doesn't take Alt long to do what an ordinary netrunner would have spent months of dangerous net surfing to find. Eventually, she uncovers something interesting. Lucina Kushinada. A netrunner of no small skill. Her story is a tragic one. Her current whereabouts are shrouded in mystery, but Alt is still able to track Lucy down. After losing the people she loved to Arezaka, she'd gone to the moon of all places. But ultimately she'd come back. Despite Alt finding significant evidence that Lucy saw Night City as a prison, she still came back. But then, it made a grim, Unfortunate sort of sense. No one ever truly escaped Night City. You could leave it and live 100 years before dying in another part of the world entirely, but Night City would always remain with you. Your experiences within it would always stain your soul. And for most they never got that lucky because Night City either ended them before they could leave, or it pulled them back in. Lucy seemed to be the latter. However, there was something else, something strange. Flitting at the edges of her perception, it was like there were demons surrounding the information on Lucina Kushinada. Except, these weren't the demons that Alt was used to. And as she pried deeper, she found two distinct entities watching over Lucy's data like a pair of guard dogs. No, not quite dogs, one of them had a distinctly feline bent to her. The other was harder to discern, almost like she was a lot more fragmented. Alt reaches for them, curious despite herself, but the feline presence darts away, taking the other with her. Frowning, Alt tries to follow them, even throwing out a ping to show she has no bad intentions. She's friendly, or as friendly as anyone or anything can be on the net. But the feline presence doesn't seem to care. Whatever this is, it truly does have the tang of cat to it, because even once Alt has made it clear she means no harm, they still dart away from her constantly even as their movements become more playful. They understand that Alt doesn't want to hurt them, she eventually figures out, but that doesn't mean they're just going to let her catch them. She'll have to try harder than that. They play keep away for a while after that, long enough that Alt never does get around to shooting a message off to Lucy. But maybe that's for the best. She and V aren't ready yet, and Alt wants to investigate these two presences a bit more before she decides whether to truly involve Lucy in her NVS plans. Not to mention run the whole plan by V himself before she pulls the trigger on anything. He's in charge, after all. For now, she pulls away. The sun is rising and V will be up soon, after all. XXX Alt, get me in touch with Regina Jones, yet. Alt smiles. Putting you through now, V. It takes a moment, not because Alt has any difficulties but because the fixer doesn't immediately pick up. She could have forced the connection through, and if Jones had proven to be irritating she would have, but thankfully that doesn't prove necessary. Yet? Who is this? The one-eyed fixer of Kabuki wears a frown as she looks at V through the interface. V, meanwhile, just nods his head in greetings. Name's V. I'm a solo. Heard you might have work for a mercenary so I thought I'd get in touch. Never heard of you before, V. Why should I trust you with any of my gigs? That wasn't entirely true, Alt notices. Even as Regina's talking, she's multitasking. Looking up V and what information she has on him, the fixer definitely has heard of him before. Not much of course. She knows about the odd gig he's done here and there over the last several months, and she knows he's supposed to be part of a three-man crew. In all fairness, her disbelief is understandable even if Alt doesn't like it. V, of course, goes with the flow. Despite being king of the afterlife and a living Night City legend before he finally kicked it in his previous timeline, the mercenary slips back into the role of solo with no reputation with surprising ease. Don't gotta trust me. Just gotta take a chance. Give me a job. Don't care what it is. Can be as shit as you want. Let me prove myself to you and we'll work on building a proper relationship from there. Alt smiles as she watches things from both ends. Regina does her best to hide it, but she's mildly impressed by V's words. In the end, she only takes a few seconds to deliberate before finally nodding. All right. You're right, I don't gotta trust you to give you a chance to shoot yourself in the foot. Got a gig for you that's relatively low stakes. Fuck it up and we're done, but it won't be the end of the world or anything. After pausing a moment to give V a chance to react, only for him to stay quiet and tilt his head to the side, Regina continues on. I got a call from a man named Jacob Lamb. Friend of mine. He used to be a movie director, but when Bushido X had a loss of over $1 billion eddies, well, he hasn't set foot on a set since. These days, he makes a living playing cards. Only, he's not always smart about it. Tried his hand in an illegal Tiger Claws casino that's operating out of the back of Kashu-Yohanton, a kabuki eatery. Regina scoffs. He should have walked away after the first few losses, but Jacob has never known when to stop. Before he knew it, he was down his watch, his wedding ring, and last but certainly not least, one of his optics. That's the gig. Jacob wants his implant back, and from what my sources tell me, it should still be in the casino. How you get it is up to you. Alt watches as Regina sends over the details with a flash of her eyes. She can see from V's memories that he recognizes this gig. He'd done it before, in fact. How amusing. It would be a walk in the park, even without V having all of the cyberware he was used to. Some small Tiger Claws den wasn't going to be more than a road bump for them. V doesn't say that though. He makes a show of looking over the details just like a professional would before giving Regina a nod. I'll get it done. Vaguely impressed but hiding it, Regina Jones hums for a moment before returning the nod. If you do, I might have more work for you. Haven't seen you in action quite yet, but I like your attitude so far. V guess I'll know soon if your walk is as good as your talk. V smirks but doesn't offer a rejoinder to that as Regina ends the call. Then, rising from the couch in his apartment, the mercenary makes sure he has everything he needs before heading for the door. As he does so, he tilts his head to the side and grunts. What do you think, Alt? I think this will be a cakewalk, V. Not only have you done this before, but these aren't exactly the cream of the crop within the Tiger Claws, let alone all of Night City. V snorts at that but shakes his head. Not what I meant. How do you think I should play this? Not just this gig, though it's the start. But, everything, really. Alt blinks before pushing into V's mind to get a better understanding of what he means. He welcomes her like an old friend, or perhaps a new lover. As they mentally embrace, she makes a small noise of understanding. Ah! V wasn't any more worried about the Kashu-Yohanton gig than she was. There was no denying that he would ace it, especially with her backing him up. However, he was wondering how exactly he wanted to portray himself to Regina going forward. As far as V knew, Regina should have several gigs for him right now. But he needed to prove himself worthy of them first. That was how it had gone last time, at least. He'd done this first gig for her and then she'd trusted him with more and more things. Eventually, she'd even asked for his help in non-lethally taking down cyber psychos all over Night City, something V had done with a 100% success rate. Not every cyber psycho could be helped after the fact, unfortunately, but V had still gotten every single one of them into Regina's hands alive. What happened to them after that wasn't his fault. What V was truly wondering was how to handle his eventual reputation. Right here and now, with this first gig and every other gig that he managed to pry out of Regina's hands by the end of the day, V would essentially be building the foundations for his Night City rep as a solo. Nothing that had happened before Kanpiki would ever be remembered when V took the entire city by storm like the one-man army he was. But then that begged the question, did he go hard and loud? Did he go soft and quiet? Was he supposed to downplay his capabilities for now to try and avoid drawing the eyes of too many malcontents, or should he show off his impossible skill level right off the bat and not bother hiding a single thing? That was what V was asking her. Alt was touched that he would let her weigh in on something like that, truthfully. But in the end, as far as she was concerned, there was only one path forward for them. Chapter 7, New Kid Become Like a Ghost, V leave the common rabble ignorant and wondering if you even exist, while those who know will know only that your competency is unmatched and always dependable. Sure, V could tear through this gig and a dozen others and carve a bloody name for himself on the city overnight. He could also downplay his abilities, make some small mistakes here and there, and come across as the amateur he was supposed to be while also appearing as a diamond in the rough. But what was the point? To fool some fixers and the people in charge into thinking that he was just another tool on their tool belt? Fuck that. They needed to learn to respect him. They needed to know he was the one they could turn to for even the most difficult of gigs. Smiling slightly, V nods his head, before steadily picking up speed. Sounds like a plan. Alt smiles too, even as she flickers out of view, turning her attention back to the net. No need to give V any distractions while he did his work. XXX a half hour later and it's done. Alt watches on quietly as V deposits the client's optic implant in the drop box with no on the wiser. He'd slipped into Cassia Johansson through a back door and gone entirely undetected, even as he'd moved between amateur tiger claws like the ghost he was. Not only had he secured Jacob Lamb's optic cyberware, but he'd also pilfered everything else of value they had as well, and Alt watches as he sells all of that off to the Dropbox too while simultaneously placing a call to Regina Jones. Curiosity getting the better of her, Alt pushes out onto the net and towards the fixer's home base. Yaiba Tower has a hell of a lot of security, both physical and cyber, but so long as Alt isn't going on the attack and is merely slipping in to observe, it has nothing on her. She's able to drift into the system in the same ghost-like way V had drifted through Cassia Johansson, allowing her to watch Regina through her own cameras as the woman picks up V's call. V just received confirmation that the implant was put in the drop box. Have to admit, part of me almost doesn't believe it. Even as she's talking, Regina is looking at one of her monitors. Through her snooping, Alt can see that the fixer had immediately started putting out feelers the moment she heard V was on his way to the drop box. The complete lack of any sort of noise out of the area where the Cassia Johansson bar was located had her stumped. Of course, once they realized they'd been robbed blind, the tiger claws would be making a lot of noise more than likely. But it was too early for that. And they wouldn't find anything anyways. Far from being upset, V sounds amused when he responds to Regina next. Oh? Think I went and grabbed some other optic to try and pass off as the real deal. Regina huffs and Alt knows that's precisely one of the theories that the one-eyed fixer had. Of course, she's already debunked it herself. The implant is registered to the client Jacob Lamb, so unless you hacked into government databases or somehow convinced Jacob himself to go along with this farce, it's the real deal. And that means you're the real deal too. Well done, V, transferring over the eddies now. Much appreciated. Got any more work for me? Alt watches as Regina hesitates. Obviously she does, and obviously the fixer isn't in such a comfortable position that she can afford to ignore a competent merc like V. It's just a matter of which gig she's going to give him next. Gently sifting through the Watson fixer's systems, Alt looks over the possibilities and waits as patiently as V for Regina to finally get around to assigning one. Jotaro Shobo. Tiger Claw scum who works out of his primary studio, the Ho-Oh Club in Kabuki. Twisted motherfucker scrolls XBDs, grabs people off the street, joytoys and junkies alike. The sort that no one will miss except the mocks. The mocks don't take too kindly to this kind of shit, so they've put out a hit on him. You handled Cassia Johansson rather well, let's see how you handle this. Find Jotaro and deal with him how you see fit. Understood. As the call comes to an end, part of Alt remains with V as he heads in the direction of the Ho-Oh Club, mostly to act as backup netrunner if he needs it. But the majority of her attention stays on Regina Jones because frankly, Alt already knows exactly how this is going to go. And indeed, it's not long at all before V calls Regina back. The fixer has barely even managed to divert her attention to something else when he's once more getting in touch. Alt watches as Regina's brow furrows and her lips curl down. She still picks up the call but she's not happy about it. Yes. Send a car. Regina's frown grows more pronounced at that, and her fingers fly across one of her keyboards as she brings up the latest news coming out of the Kabuki area. Clearly she's expecting to see something, but there's nothing there. And why would I do that? I've successfully extracted Jotaro Shobo from the Ho-Oh Club without anyone knowing. He's still breathing for now, but I can't exactly lug him halfway across the city on my shoulder without someone taking issue with that fact. So I figure either you send a car that will deliver his twisted ass to the Mox, or you tell me it's a bad idea and I zero the fucker here and now. Alt can't help but grin as Regina slowly processes everything V has just said. Well, slow by Alt and V's standards. To be fair, it only takes the fixer a handful of seconds to adapt to the change in circumstances. And no, no, that won't be necessary, V. That's an excellent idea, sending the car now. I'm sure the Mox will be very happy to make Jotaro's acquaintance, and take a pound of flesh from his sorry skin for every Joitoy he's killed. The trade-off takes place a few minutes later, with V dropping the unconscious form of Jotaro Shobo into the trunk of the car Regina has sent and the driver heading towards Lizzie's a moment later with the precious car. After Regina transfers over the eddies for a job well done, V grunts. Anything else for me, Jones? Yet. If you can extract a monster like Jotaro, maybe you can handle an SOS for me as well. Rather average story, really. Stupid Gong named Bertie joined up with Maelstrom and quickly got in over his head when he realized you don't just leave a gang like that. His sister Lucy happened to be a Ripperdoc and offered to take on his debt so he could get out. 3 months of her services in exchange for her brother's freedom. Only now it's been 4.5 months and it's become obvious that they aren't going to just let her go. Get in, get her out unharmed and unscathed, and the eddies are yours. On it. Alt watches on in amusement as the call ends and Regina immediately sends a driver to be on standby near the clean-cut building that the Maelstrom who have Lucy Thackeray are operating out of. She's rapidly losing any hesitation or lack of belief in VS abilities, which is good. Of course, she's also starting to look up the mercenary for a second time, her other work all but forgotten. As V works the gig, Regina Jones starts working her sources, trying to find out just who the hell he really is. She doesn't find much of course, but Alt still steps in just to make things go a little smoother. Nothing direct, all the AI does is put up some false warning signs, the kind of stuff that an inquisitive mind like Regina will immediately catch. She was a journalist before she was a fixer after all, and she was trained to note things. With a couple of revisions on Alt's part, VS lack of history starts to look a little less organic and a little more artificial. As though someone actually has something to hide. It's the kind of thing where Regina doesn't actually learn anything new, but she's still satisfied by the connections she thinks she's able to make. Suddenly, VS dangerous competence makes a lot more sense to her, and that in turn sets her at ease even as she begins compiling a proper file for V with all of the work he's done for her so far in it. Of course, she's barely even started on that before V has finished the latest gig. Due to Regina's growing belief in his skills, Lucy Thackeray is delivered to the car waiting for her just down the road within moments of being freed. Meanwhile, the Maelstrom still don't know she's even gone. It won't be long before they realize that their press-ganged Ripperdoc has rabbited, but by that point it'll be far too late for them to do anything about it. Alt watches on as Regina gives V her thanks as well as his next gig, before moving on to begin talking Lucy Thackeray through her next options. The fixer offers to get Lucy the hell out of Night City, but apparently Ms. Thackeray is too much of a bleeding heart to run away that easily. Instead, Regina sends Lucy to another fixer named Muammar Reyes who will supply her with a new identity. Meanwhile, VS' latest gig is undoubtedly the hardest one that Regina has given him yet. Forget Jotaro and Lucy, for all that the Ho-Oh Club was Tiger Claw, it wasn't as secured as it should have been. The Revere Courier Services warehouse on Martin Street, however, had quite a lot of security surrounding it given the amount of goods that went in and out of it on the regular. And on top of that, it was controlled by Tiger Claws. Not that any of that mattered to V. The only difference this time was that V had to steal an entire van and it was a lot harder to slip out a large vehicle without anyone noticing. But then, that was where Alt could come in. Putting more of her focus and attention over on the V side of things as he approaches the warehouse, Alt slips into their security systems with even more ease than she did Regina's. Unlike Regina's, she actually outright takes control of them as well, squelching all possible alarms. Looking through the eyes of every camera at once, she tags the tiger claws on sight one by one, letting V see them with his Kiroji optics. Then, together, the two of them begin quick hacking. One after the other, in a time frame as fast as 30 seconds, every single tiger claw in and around the warehouse falls to the ground, convulsing. It's not as quiet or stealthy as V has done before, but then it doesn't really have to be. Nobody sees his face. Nobody gets even a trace of their presence, beyond the blitzkrieg and subsequent theft. V is able to walk right up into the warehouse, saunter upstairs to the computer and have it authorize him as a driver. Then, he heads back downstairs and hops in the van, driving it out of the silent parking lot and to its destination. After he's exited the van, Regina calls him this time rather than the other way around. "Excellent work, V. Eddie's coming in now. And before you ask, yes, I have more work for you. One more gig, in fact." Grinning in a rather carefree manner, V chuckles. "Only one?" Huffing, Regina crosses her arms over her chest. "This'll be your 5th gig with me in a day, V. You realize people in your line of work usually take their time with these things to get them right, yet." Rather than get offended, V just smirks. "Have I gotten anything wrong so far, Jones?" "No. Which is why I'm trusting you with a gig I've had on the back burner for a while. Maelstrom has an initiation ceremony. Getting into the gang requires an operation that splits your optic nerves and lets you see more or whatever quasi-religious bullshit they've made up. I need footage of their rite. The whole thing from start to finish." V is quiet for a moment before nodding almost solemnly. "I'll get it done." Alt kind of understands why. After all, this wasn't a gig for a client. Rather, Regina Jones was the client this time around. This was part of her crusade against cyberpsychos and cyberpsychosis in general. Lots of cyberpsychos came out of Maelstrom. Lots of Maelstrom were borderline cyberpsycho and getting worse every day. Of course, you don't just send anyone up against Maelstrom, but V had already proven his capabilities today. And he does so again with this job as well, making it in and out of the Heaven Med Clinic without raising a single alarm. Within the hour, he's depositing the footage that Regina has asked for into a Dropbox and Alt watches as the fixer slowly breathes out upon uploading the data. Then, she places the call. "Thanks V. For all the hard work. Nothing more today, like I already said. But you can bet I'll call you up again when I have more for you. You've impressed me, V. More than impressed me. Always happy to work with a competent fixer, Jones. Let me know when you have something to send my way." Their call ends but Alt lingers for a moment in Regina's systems. Just long enough to see the fixer put V's contact information on the short list for mercenaries who might just be worth calling on if she hears about a cyberpsycho situation with enough time to do something about it. V will be happy about that, Alt knows. Pulling herself away from Yaiba Tower and back to V, Alt arrives just in time to see him get another message. Not a call, but a text with a simple address and time from a familiar name. She watches V look it over consideringly. "Are you going to accept her invitation, V?" Tilting his head to the side, V hums. "I didn't last time. Figured it was probably a trap." Alt checks what she can from her end. "It shouldn't be, but obviously I can't do a deeper dive of Corpo servers without risking detection. Still, everything I can see says the offer is genuine. All that's really left is for V to decide if he's going to go and take Meredith Stout up on her offer of carnal delights or not." Chapter 8 Meredith Stout. What was she doing? No, seriously, she knew this was a bad idea. She was still in the middle of finishing things up with Gilchrist. She'd gotten all the information she needed to take the bastard down once and for all, and in doing so raise herself up through Militica's ranks higher than ever before. And yet here she was, inches from the finish line, heading down to the Notel Motel to blow off some steam. She definitely shouldn't be taking a risk like this right now. But the stress had gotten to her. She needed an outlet so she could go into the final stages of her battle against Gilchrist with a clear mind. At least, that's the excuse Meredith Stout was giving herself as she paced back and forth across one of the rooms of the Notel Motel. Getting a simple confirmation from the man she'd propositioned, the corpo had headed over right away and gotten into costume. Specifically, she'd dressed down from her suit into a more comfortable attire. If any of her co-workers saw her right now, they would almost certainly use this against her, and frankly, they'd be right to. Meredith's tastes were somewhat eccentric if the spiked dog collar around her neck and spiked bands around her wrists were anything to go off of. Alongside the cupless bra and nipple pasties she has on, and the skin-tight black latex pants, she knows she looks good, but she also knows she looks downright scandalous. That was why this was so risky, especially now. And yet, she had high hopes that she'd chosen precisely the right man to scratch her itch all the same. After all, if she could trust anyone, surely it would be the mercenary who had helped her get the dirt on Anthony Gilchrist from Maelstrom in the first place. He didn't have to help her. He didn't have to agree to work with her. Meredith wasn't an idiot. For all that she knew she was so far above him that it wasn't even funny, she also knew that even a rat could bite your ankle. That silly street kid had plenty of reasons to betray a corpo suit like her, and he hadn't at the All Foods plant, so he wouldn't hear either. Or so Meredith hoped. But she also came prepared. When her cyberware pings her that he's entered the premises, she stops pacing and turns to face the door, arms crossed over her half-bared chest. A moment later and the door opens, letting in the man himself. He looks much like she remembered him during their initial interactions, except not. There's something different about the way he carries himself. Something that Meredith can't quite place. No matter. She knows how she has to play this. Pointing behind her, she barks out an order. Bed. Now. The young mercenary she'd drawn into her orbit pauses for a moment, tilting his head and studying her up and down until Meredith begins to color. Damn it, this whole thing relied on her having a proper hold on him. If she couldn't even intimidate him properly. I'm not going to tell you twice, mercenary. You can either get on the bed or get out. Of course, if he leaves now, she'll have to have him killed. He's seen too much already. But instead, V shakes his head, doing neither. That isn't going to work for me, Meredith. I don't bottom. And frankly, I'm not sure you top. Meredith flushes at his overly familiar tone. How dare he? Even if he's a little right, just because she prefers to bottom doesn't mean she can't top. And she definitely can't afford to bottom here and now with him. Not if she wants to make sure he doesn't say shit once all is said and done. But before she can respond, he continues on. Let's do this another way, yeah? A short quick hack battle. No physical violence, no guns, no hands. Just your deck against mine. Nothing lethal, nothing permanent. We go until one of us has the other at their mercy and that decides who's in charge here. Sound good? Just who did this brat think he was? Never mind the cool confidence he's suddenly displaying, even though a week ago he'd been twitchy as fuck and so obviously wet behind the ears that it wasn't even funny. Even if his confident attitude is a little bit of a turn on, his arrogance is going to be his undoing. A quick hack battle? Between her and a street kid? He could have at least suggested something he might have a chance of winning. Sure. Sounds good. She half expects him to try and hack her immediately after she agrees, but no such assault on her personal ice begins. Instead, he nods and steps further into the room, moving until they're both standing across from one another, staring each other down. On the count of 3 then. 1, 2, 3. Immediately, Meredith goes to launch a suite of non-lethal quick hacks designed for rapid incapacitation and capture of priority targets. Just as immediately, she never gets the chance because her world goes dark, Her body freezes up as an electrical shock rushes through her, and the connection to her cyberware, including her deck, is cut off before she can even blink. Actually, she can't even blink because as she collapses to the floor in a boneless heap, she finds herself utterly paralyzed. System collapse. Or at least, a variant of it. Meredith knows about the system collapse quick hack. It's a corpo quick hack, after all. Which begs the question, how does a street kid have one? And more than that, how has he modified it so she remains conscious, albeit trapped in her own body? System collapse was a direct attack on someone's nervous system. It was an untraceable, silent quick hack that left your enemy completely at your mercy if they didn't have the ice to block it. Meredith Stout did not have the ice to block it. She didn't even have access to the quick hack herself. It was serious cyberware and she was, well, she was still working her way up the corporate ladder. From how she's fallen, she's treated to the sight of V walking up to her and sighing before reaching down and picking her up. It occurs to her then that he can do whatever he wants to her right now. That's as much a turn-on as it is a terrifying realization. Even as she feels horrified by how much she underestimated him, she's also starting to get aroused by the power he has over her. Damn it all, her own tastes were once again getting in her way. Fuck, she really had fucked up here, hadn't she? V probably wasn't even a street kid now that she thought about it. He was an undercover corpo, had to be. And she'd invited him to basically have his way with her, both carnally and professionally. She was so screwed, and it was incredibly embarrassing that she was looking forward to being screwed the one way, even as she panicked over being screwed the other. Just as Meredith is getting caught up in her own head, however, the modified system collapse comes to an abrupt end. She twitches as she realizes she can suddenly move again, though access to her cyberware remains restricted. She quickly realizes. V, meanwhile, just smirks down at her with her head resting in his lap, one hand carding through her hair almost, gently. Back with us. Quickly sitting up from where he'd laid her unresisting body out so that she was lounging on the bed with her head in his lap, Meredith scowls, gazing at him searchingly. Who the hell are you? Who do you work for? Casual as can be, but understandably so for someone who can shut her down in less than a second, V shrugs. Name's V. I'm a nobody as far as most of this city is concerned, but it won't be that way for long. As for who I work for, I work for me, first and foremost. After that, I work for the top bidder. Meredith's eyes narrow and she clutches at the sheet beneath her, beneath them. Why was he playing games with her? He could do whatever he wanted to her, and they both knew it. Did he just like playing with his food? Reading between the lines, it seemed that what little she'd managed to pull from looking into V was a lie. He probably wasn't born and raised here in Night City. He was probably from out of town, with a cover identity that was so barebones she hadn't blinked twice at it. Especially since his whole attitude the last time they'd met had lined up well with a green street kid who only had about 6 months of merc work to his name. But now he wasn't hiding it anymore. His real self. His true skill. He was laying it all bare for her to see. Why? Because it wouldn't matter? Because she was dead, and she just didn't know it yet? And who hired you to come after me? If I'm going to die, I'd at least like to know which scumfuck I need to curse to my grave. V stares at her blankly for a moment before shaking his head. I'm not here to kill you, Meredith. No one has hired me to take you out. You're the one who invited me here out of the blue, remember? That was true. And as far as she could tell, he was telling the truth about the rest as well. But then, why? Why the act at the All Foods plant if you're just going to show me the real you now? V pauses for a moment before smiling crookedly. I suppose I'm just tired of hiding it. Meredith mulls that over for a moment. If he was telling the truth, then, slowly, the corpo slides off of the bed and onto her knees, crawling between V's legs as she looks up at him. Her hands fall upon his inner thighs, before sliding up his crotch. I guess you won, didn't you? So, I'm all yours now. You're in charge and I'm not. Is this acceptable, to start? She glances meaningfully at his crotch at that last part, prompting V to grin as he reaches out and runs a hand through her hair. Meredith shivers as his fingers run across her scalp, but unlike before when he'd been gentle, now he firms up his grasp, gripping down rather harshly on her blonde locks as she gasps in discomfort. Go ahead. Take it out. Licking her lips, Meredith does as she's told. Deftly pulling his cock from its confines, she's a little surprised to see it's completely natural. She's dealt with all sorts of men in her life, but most of them had a Mr. Stud. Though to be fair, most of them were corpo like her, and it was supposedly very popular among corporate workers. V doesn't have any need for an augmentation as far as Meredith can see. His cock is big and growing bigger still as she strokes it up and down, hot breath ghosting across it while he continues to firmly hold her head back, forcing her to only use her hands on him. His big fat dick is right in front of her face and the dog collar wearing corpo finds herself moaning a bit as she tries to lean forward almost instinctively, only to be held back by his grip. She whines at this, right up until he finally loosens his hold and gives her a one-word command. Suck. Then, she all but dives down his cock, her eyes fixed on his face as she begins to bob up and down his member with gusto and enthusiasm. She didn't know V's story. She had no idea who he really was at this point, given everything she'd thought she knew about the mercenary was a lie. But if he was going to kill her, he wouldn't have been this convoluted about it, she figures. And that means she can enjoy herself. And she plans to, immensely. XXX Alt watches on as Meredith Stout bobs up and down on V's cock, humming her amusement. It seemed like the blonde corpo had come to a rather funny conclusion as far as V was concerned. She thought he was some sort of undercover agent for one of her competitors or something. She'd thought he was going to torture her for sensitive melee tech information there for a second. But to be fair, it was V's own fault. Alt hadn't even been the one to disable Meredith so quickly. V had forbidden her from interfering, telling her to let him and Meredith duke it out between them. Ultimately, while it had rankled somewhat to let V risk it all without her help, she'd abided by his instructions. And he really had risked it all here. Without Alt's support, V's cyberware was still bargain bin, and his ice was practically non-existent. With her, nobody was going to be able to detect or hack him easily, but without her, he was practically defenseless. However, he had taken Night City by storm without her once before. And part of that had involved V learning to be a netrunner on the fly. Really, he'd done it all, and with only Johnny Silverhand in his head the first time around, V had had to do it all, because it wasn't like Johnny was useful for much of anything. Not in the same way Alt was. Still, the way V had thrown a modified system collapse at Meredith in under a second had been, artistically done. It was enough for Alt to feel like she was wet with arousal despite the fact that she didn't even have a body. Oh, or maybe that was because she'd been piggybacking off of Meredith's senses ever since V took the corpo down. Feeling Meredith's helplessness along with her adrenaline, arousal, and terror had been quite the treat. Now, she was mostly feeling the corpo woman's submissiveness and arousal. Meredith's hands have left V's cock now that she's bobbing up and down on his dick with her mouth. One hand has gravitated to V's balls, fondling them rather expertly. The other hand has disappeared down the front of the dog collar wearing corpo's skin-tight latex pants, fingering her own cunt as she moans and gurgles around his shaft. It's all delicious, especially with Alt seeing things through Meredith's eyes and feeling things through the defenseless corpo's body. She might just have to push V to get her a body of her own eventually, at this rate. But for now, all of them know that the night is still young and this is just them getting started. Chapter 9, Meredith Stout PT2 Meredith descends all the way down V's cock again and again without an ounce of hesitation. She swallows his entire mass to the base and then goes right back up, not choking or gagging even a little bit. But then to be fair, as a corpo, she had a pretty advanced suite of cyberware. Being able to do something like repressing her gag reflex on command is just par for the course. And no, not just so she can get on her knees and deep throat one of her superiors' cocks whenever they saw fit, thank you very much. Rather, this bit of cyberware came from sometimes needing a clandestine location to store a small object, like an information shard or something. If you were captured by the enemy, everyone loved to check the rectum or vagina for any hidden secrets, but they weren't nearly as likely to check the hidden pouch next to your stomach. Well, unless they did a full body scan, but you'd be surprised how cheap even corporations could be when it came to interrogation. Regardless, right now Meredith is definitely using it for the other thing, that being to deep throat vs cock like there's no tomorrow, sucking his dick non-stop and hollowing out her cheeks as she stares up into the mysterious mercenary's eyes. Even though she'd already decided to just enjoy herself, she's still curious about him. But she doesn't dare split her focus and start trying to look up the guy while she's still submitting to his big fat cock. Instead, Meredith goes down on his dick like the professional she is, his hands carding through her hair until he finally gets this glint in his eyes that the dog collar wearing corpo recognizes all too well. She sucks harder, even as he suddenly grips down tight on her head and pushes her all the way to the base of his cock while at the same time thrusting forward. Swallowing continuously, Meredith is more than prepared for when he finally starts to come, his seed blazing down the back of her throat and into her gullet without pause. As she drinks his jizz, V tosses his head back and groans, clearly enjoying himself immensely. It's a moment of weakness that she might have been able to take advantage of if she wanted to. She could have turned the tables on him maybe, hit him with a quick hack and ultimately swapped their places so she was on top. But, she doesn't dare risk it. Not only is he seemingly not an enemy as far as she can tell, but he'd beaten her in their little wager fair and square. And while Meredith isn't some nitwit who actually follows some code of honor or anything like that, she's also not about to piss off a fucking monster. Finally, V finishes and pulls back, releasing his hold on her hair as he does so. Grunting, he gives her a knowing grin, almost like he's telling her he gave her that opportunity just to see if she would try to take advantage of it in him. Or maybe she's reading too much into the look, because he doesn't actually mention it at all. Instead. Not bad. I hope you know we're just getting started though. Meredith's breath hitches at that, her pussy clenching around the fingers she currently has buried in it. She looks down to see V's cock already starting to rise to attention again. Surprising, and impressive. After all, she already knew he didn't have a Mr. Stud. While some versions of the genital cyberware were designed to look very, very lifelike, Meredith was experienced enough with those to still be able to tell them apart from the natural thing. V was sporting an impressive, all-natural package. Which made his refractory period also impressive, considering his cock was twitching its way back to life in practically no time at all. Licking her lips, Meredith's eyes flicker between V's dick and his face, even as she gives him a coquettish smile. "And how, do you want me, sir?" The mercenary doesn't even have to think about it. Face down, ass up. Like the bitchin' heat you are. Meredith Stout blushes at the call-out. She can't really argue the point to be fair, not when she's wearing a literal dog collar and matching spiked bands around her wrists. Slowly nodding, the blonde corpo climbs to her feet and unzips her pants. Peeling herself out of the skin-tight black latex isn't easy, but she still tries to make it look as sexy as possible, shimmying this way and that as she turns to face the bed. Eventually, she manages to get the pants off, revealing the complete lack of underwear under them. But then, she was literally wearing a cupless bra that was more a series of straps, along with nipple pasties. Needless to say, her going commando shouldn't be surprising, and judging by the intense look on V's face, it's not. She definitely has his attention though, Meredith notes with a smile. Climbing onto the heart-shaped bed, the blonde corpo does as she's told, assuming the position. Face down, ass up. A position of utter dominance. There was nothing lovey-dovey about this pose. Nothing gentle or tender or even all that affectionate. This was how a man who wanted to really dominate a woman fucked one. Meredith shivers as she feels V move into position behind her. His hands roll over her upturned ass for a moment, before he climbs onto the bed and crouches over her. A gasp leaves Meredith's lips as he puts his boot on the back of her head. She doesn't fight it though. If anything, the way he's taking advantage of her current pose only turns her on even more. Fuck, she's so in over her head it isn't even funny, but at the same time she can't bring herself to care right now. Her lust threatens to overwhelm her, and her arousal has never been greater. As V pushes her face deeper into the bed, he also brings his cock to her slit, dragging the bulbous head of his member back and forth across her sex. Meredith moans, muffled by her position, and wiggles her hips enticingly. Only for V to spank her in retaliation and tell her to stay still. Fuck, but this was hot. Unbelievably hot. She was the corpo's eyes widen and then roll back in her head as V finally slams his cock into her cunt. Unlike V, Meredith Stout is not all natural. She has an understated version of the Midnight Lady, the female version of the Mr. Stud. As a corpo, she has to be ready for anything, always. As a female corpo, this is especially true. If you're not willing to cheat, you're not willing to win, and being a woman in a corporation is already a disadvantage in some ways, so you'd best be ready to use your primary advantage, your body, to offset those disadvantages. That's of course what Meredith does here. Her pussy walls immediately begin rhythmically massaging up and down V's pistoning cock, even as he jackhammers into her from above. She milks his throbbing mast for all it's worth, while at the same time moaning up a storm as the sound of flesh smacking against flesh fills the hotel room. Whap! 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 V, for his part, is relentless from the very beginning. His skills with sex are just like the rest of him, to be honest. While he's got an impressive cock size, he doesn't seem like much more than that, until he gets down to business. Just like Meredith never would have expected him to be able to quick hack a system collapse through her ice in less than a second like he did, she also never would have expected him to rock her world either. Frankly, she'd figured it would be mostly about his pleasure now that he'd beaten her and put her in her place, and she'd been okay with that because even that was kind of hot in her eyes. But no. While he's definitely taking advantage of her and enjoying her body immensely in the process, everything he was doing was also sending spasms of pleasure and ecstasy rippling through her at the same time. Meredith never would have expected him to prioritize her enjoyment as much as his own, and yet here they were, with her crying out into the bed and climaxing explosively again and again upon his throbbing cock. This was all so far beyond Meredith's greatest expectations for how tonight would go that it's not even funny. She'd figured they might have some fun together, directed by her domineering presence of course. Instead, V had so thoroughly turned the tables on her that she was squealing like a pig, her toes curling in ecstasy as she comes for him. Until finally, with a grunt, V proceeds to fill her with his seed. Meredith's eyes widen and then subsequently roll back in her head as his sticky, hot jizz pumps into her womb. She gurgles and shudders for a moment beneath him, until finally it's over and he pulls out of her. For a long moment, she does nothing but lay there, face down and ass up still, with his cum starting to leak out of her freshly fucked cunt. Then, she pushes herself over onto her back, staring up at him in an unabashedly vulnerable fashion. He could end her life right here and right now and she doesn't even think she'd mind that much. How fucked is that? Even still. Thanks. That was something, V. Now she just has to figure out how to extract herself from this situation without pissing him off in the process. As much as she might have wanted to spend the night here with him, getting fucked over and over again, she didn't have the time. Shit, she hadn't had the time for this meeting in the first place. She was still in the process of taking down that scumbag Gilchrist, and while this had been great to help clear her mind, it was still a distraction she never should have allowed herself to have. But would V understand that? Would he get why she had to cut their time short despite their wager? Or would he force her to stick around? It wasn't like she could fight him off if he chose to push the issue. She would have to submit, have to play ball. And even that idea, of her potentially ruining her chances to take down Gilchrist because she was too busy being dominated by some mysterious merc, is kind of hot if Meredith is being totally honest. Alas, V smirks at her, tilting his head to the side. But you can't stay much longer, can you? Ah. Well, at least he was understanding about it. Even if a part of her was a little disappointed, she nevertheless pushes herself up and bobs her head in agreement. Yeah, need to get back to work. But don't think I'll forget everything you've done for me. Maybe that was why he'd helped her, even though the gig they'd done together now seemed to be hilariously below the pay grade of someone like him. Maybe he'd known she was going places and wanted to have her owe him a favor. Well, consider it done. You didn't get anywhere in the corporate world by forgetting the people who got you to where you'd gotten. Oh, I doubt you'll be able to forget me, Meredith. Meredith blushes at that, tucking her head down in an uncharacteristic display of shyness for a moment. No, she would not. Before she can react though. V is already gone. Clothes fixed up, the man vanishes almost like a ghost, leaving Meredith to pick up the pieces in his wake. He had truly and utterly ruined her tonight, and she'd loved every last moment of it. Fuck. She hoped he'd contact her again one day, but for now it was time to destroy Gilchrist, once and for all. XXX Victor Vector, known to most as Vic, was a man who'd been around the block a few times. He'd seen some shit, but most importantly of all, he'd seen enough to know he hadn't seen everything, not by a long shot. That might have sounded weird, but it made perfect sense when you thought about it. Some people were prone to getting cocky just because they had a little bit of experience. But eventually you got enough experience to realize there was no such thing as enough experience. There was always going to be something new. Some new situation that would blindside you and force you to readjust. Vic was the kind of man who tried his best to roll with the punches both inside and outside the boxing ring. And he took that mentality into his work as a Ripper Doc too. He didn't take anything for granted, not ever. That said, there were some things that should have been largely set in stone. Like for instance, young mercs wet behind their ears with a chip on their shoulder and something to prove. He'd seen a million of them, and while they were all unique and different in their own way, plenty were as similar as the next to one another. In that way, V was much the same. Or rather, he had been. When he'd come to Vic about getting some chrome before that big gig he and Jackie had been picked up for, Vic had done what he could for the kid and hoped it would be enough. Well, it hadn't been. Sure, V had survived, but he'd lost Jackie and T-Bug, and shit had hit the fan in a major way. That left a mark on someone, of course it did, and V looked to be the kind of kid who went full throttle in the face of grief, rather than turtling up. Vic figured the eddies should have slowed him down though, at least a little bit. And yet, I've got some money to spend, Doc. What do you have for me so far? Vic lets out a sigh as V steps into his office, flicking a short message over that shows him just how many eddies the younger man has managed to acquire in a frankly ludicrous amount of time. It's only been a day, V. V just smirks as he walks over, nodding. Yeah. I know some of the bigger stuff I asked you to find for me isn't going to be even close to available yet, but I can still afford some of the stuff you've already got in stock now, right? Yeah, yes, he could. Vic sighs and brings up his catalog, inputting the amount of eddies V has to burn so the interface will only show him the stuff in his price range. Then, the Ripper Doc watches and waits as V considers his options. Chapter 10, New Chrome, Old Chrome. As V looks through his database, Victor Vector looks at V. The young man had been through a lot recently, and based on Vic's experience, he didn't seem to be handling it well. Oh sure, he didn't look like he was about to blow or anything, but that alone was setting off all sorts of alarm bells in the Ripper Doc's head. V was relatively green compared to most gonks in his line of work. Sure, he had some experience both from running with Jackie and T-Bug for the past 6 months as well as growing up on the streets of Night City. You didn't survive to be V's age in a place like Night City without picking up some tricks along the way. But compared to your average merc, V was still new to this life. He should have still been getting his bearings, taking it slow, easing himself into this sort of work. Unfortunately, Night City didn't work like that, as Vic well knew. You didn't really get a chance to build up your repertoire and improve your skill set slowly over time. Even playing things safe put a target on your back because it marked you as a small fish instead of a shark. It let the bottom feeders know that you were vulnerable. Prevailing wisdom, if it could be called that, was to take risks. Sure, taking risks might wind up with you fucked 7 ways to Sunday, but if you didn't take risks, you were probably fucked anyways, so might as well, right? Victor had seen it time and time again. Jackie, T-Bug, and V were just the latest mercenary team to take their risk, shoot their shot, and get absolutely fucked for it. Admittedly, because of Jackie, this one hurt more than most. Victor and Misty hadn't even known Jackie and V for that long, but Jackie was the sort of guy who had a larger-than-life personality. Jackie was the kind of man who drew you in regardless of how closed off you were, or how used to losing people you might have been. In Misty's case, that resulted in a romantic relationship. In Victor's case, Jackie had become a close friend and sparring partner. They liked to box, to beat up on one another and also watch some of the matches on Vic's monitor. By comparison, V was sort of a friend in a way, but now he was all that Vic and Misty had left. Vic wanted the kid to succeed even if he was on his own, really he did, but to gain this much money in one day spoke of something darker at work. The Ripper Doc just didn't know how to properly bring it up with the young merc. Damn Vic, don't got much, do you? Victor raises an eyebrow as V scrolls through his catalog. He had plenty, really. He wasn't the richest or most famous Ripper Doc in Night City, but he wasn't hurting for business either in spite of his out-of-the-way location. He let his work speak for itself and his work seemed to be doing a pretty good job because he hadn't had to spend a dime on advertisement in years. For V to act like Vic didn't have much, well, Vic already had a list of the sort of cyberware V wanted him to get for him. Some of that stuff, Vic had already decided he might drag his feet on for a while, for the kid's sake if nothing else. He hadn't been planning on telling V that, but maybe a little harsh truth would help in this instance. Like I said V, it's only been a day. I'm not going to just have a Sandy or anything else too high tier hanging around. And even if I did and even if you had the eddies for it, I wouldn't install a Sandevistan in you, V. Not as you are now. That last bit finally gets V to look up from the catalog, his eyebrow lifting as his mouth quirks up in wry amusement. As I am now, Vic. Well, he wasn't getting upset at least, so Vic figured it was probably okay to keep going. Hidden V. You're hurting. And that's okay. So are Misty and I. In the end, it's about how you respond to that hurt. You can work your way through it and let it go, or you can let it fester inside of you until it spoils and poisons every other part of your life. Visibly taken aback, V pauses for a moment, giving Vic a proper long stare. No more amusement, no more sarcasm. Just quiet between the two men. Finally, V nods his head. I hear ya, Vic. I'm not about to let Jackie and T-Bug's deaths destroy me. You don't gotta worry about that. Vic opens his mouth but V cuts him off with a raised hand. I get it. I probably look like I'm quietly going crazy right before your eyes. And someone going crazy who chips a bunch of cyberware and only has one path in front of them, yet. Cyberpsychosis. Neither of them say it, but there's definitely no denying that that's what VS talking about. That won't happen to me, Vic. I promise. I'm gonna make sure Jackie's avenged, but I ain't planning on dying to make it happen. That would be an insult to his memory. He got me out of Kanpiki Plaza in one piece, gave me a second lease on life. I'm going to make the most of it. Promise. Silence falls between them, with Vic not quite sure what to say for a moment. V has basically matched Vic's bluntness with an overwhelming bluntness of his own. No beating around the bush, no hiding from the truth. Vic hadn't even had to be the one to bring up cyberpsychosis as a possible outcome to this crusade V seemed to be starting. Part of him wanted to call bullshit. Part of him wanted to push harder, because there was no way someone with as little experience as V should have been doing as well as he was, both mentally and professionally. But, before he can find the words, V suddenly turns the monitor in Vic's direction, showing him his choices. Here, these options should be in my budget, yeah? What do you think, can I handle this much at least? V's tone is a mixture of sardonic and teasing, but Vic nevertheless looks at the cyberware he's picked out. Adrenaline converter for the nervous system, microrotors for the circulatory system, and subdermal armor and optical camo for the integumentary system. Not exactly terrible choices, and they spoke of a mercenary who was aiming for subtle and undetected. The type of mercenary who Vic would normally consider smarter than most. In the end, Vic can't really complain here, not without being unreasonable. He almost feels like that's why V went with these choices, just to set Vic at ease for later on when he finally started prodding about the Sandy. Still. Yeah V, I'd say you can probably handle this. It's a lot of new internal chrome all at once, but I assume multiple sessions isn't an option for you, is it? He's expecting a negative response to that, maybe a wry smile and a shake of the head. But to Vic's surprise, V just tilts his head to the side. Is that what you recommend, Vic? Damn it all. Jack in, let me get a look at your BIOS. V does so without complaint, and Vic frowns as he looks over V's condition. He would have expected a lot worse given the other man just survived Kanpiki Plaza and a run-in with not only Arezaka elites, but also Atom fucking Smasher himself. And yet, V is in relatively good condition. Not perfect by any means, but better than Vic would have thought. And there's no sign of whatever the fuck the young merc had done in the past 24 hours to pull together the dough he was now flaunting in Vic's direction either. Seeing as this cyberware is all internal and nothing too heavy outside of the optical camo, you'd probably be fine to do it all in one session. V hums and nods at that, smiling slightly but not radiating the smugness Vic would have expected. Huffing a little, the Ripper Doc shakes his head and points over to the chair. Sit down V, let's get started. XXX. Stepping out of Vic's clinic a few hours later, V looks up at the sky and sighs. Beside him, Alt flickers into view after a moment, the visual illusion of her gorgeous form leaning back against a wall. I suppose from his perspective, you must look like you're going off the deep end. V tilts his head in Alt's direction in acknowledgement before beginning to walk. He doesn't bother censoring himself or whispering as they move down the street, even though there are people constantly passing him by. In a place like Night City, whispering only got more attention, and seeing someone seemingly talking to themselves wasn't strange at all. It either meant they were crazy or on a call, it was pretty much a coin flip which one it was. Yeah, I suppose you're right. Just a little surprised he's being so careful about it. He wasn't like this last time around. I mean, he cared, but he didn't try to stop me from doing what needed to be done or chipping what chrome I needed to do what I had to do. Alt chuckles at that. Of course he didn't, you were dying anyways, V. That causes V to blink, even as he realizes she's right. Last time around, as far as Vic had known, V was dying anyways. He was being consumed by the digital ghost of Johnny Silverhand, slowly but surely replaced by the long-dead rocker boy's engram. By comparison, what was chipping in chrome to that? Even if it was a lot of chrome, even if it was a dangerous amount of chrome in hindsight. Ultimately, Victor Vector had done everything in his power to help V save himself, and while at the end of the day it hadn't exactly worked, the man had still been there for V in a way very few others had. For that, V would be eternally grateful, and maybe he'd be a little bit nicer to the Vic of this timeline as well. Although, TCH, I just hope this doesn't mean I have to go to another ripper dock to get work done. Vic is the best, but without certain death hanging over my head, not sure he's going to be willing to chip in as much chrome as I want in the time frame I expect to need it. Shrugging, Alt picks up the pace so she's out in front of him, walking backwards as he moves forward without a care in the world. But then to be fair, it's not like she can run into anyone as she is now. I'm sure he'll come around. Just have to show him you can handle the small stuff easily enough and he'll know you're ready for the big stuff. Like I told you before, cyberpsychosis isn't something you have to worry about, V. You're not entirely human anymore. If Vic is as good a ripper doc as you consider him to be, he'll realize you're acclimating to the chrome he's given you already just fine, and that you'll be able to handle more in no time. V nods at that, already feeling better even with the minimal chrome he had been able to buy from Vic. And to be fair, it would take time to get the better stuff anyways, both on Vic's end and for V to get the eddies to pay for it. Sure, he'd made a lot yesterday working for Regina Jones, but even that had barely been enough to pay for the optical camo and 3 basic pieces of internal cyberware. No doubt sensing the sudden change coming over him, Alt gets a coy grin on her face and a glint in her eye. Whatcha thinkin', V? Letting out an explosive breath, V opens up a map of the city in the corner of his eye and smirks. I'm thinking last time around I was bedridden for 2 damn weeks after dying and then coming back to life. Got those 2 weeks back this time around, and I'm not going to waste them. Let's get to work. Aye, Captain. XXX. It's been a little over a week since the shit show at Konpeki Plaza, and even though she was only tangentially involved in that disaster, Judy Alvarez still hasn't fully calmed down. Maybe because her friend is a lot more involved than simply tangentially. Or maybe because V had told them both straight up that Ev needed to lie low for a little while. Judy still didn't know how V had gotten into Lizzie's undetected, and that in and of itself was a little unnerving. But more so was his warning to Ev, that nowhere but Lizzie's was safe and that she needed to get her doll chip removed ASAP. Maybe if Evelyn had listened to that advice Judy wouldn't be so stressed out, but Nat, of course not. Evelyn Parker did what Evelyn Parker wanted to do. She'd paid lip service to V's warning, sticking around Lizzie's for a week or so, but eventually she'd gotten antsy and bounced. Judy had tried to get Evelyn to at least call V and ask him if the coast was really clear or not, but that had started a bit of a row between them. As Ev put it, V wasn't her father and Judy wasn't her mother. She was a grown woman who could take care of herself. Now, it'd been a day and Judy hadn't heard back from Evelyn yet, even though they'd agreed to a check-in every few hours or so. In fact, she was starting to Judy blinks as her thoughts are interrupted by a call coming in all of the sudden. Not from Evelyn, but from V biting her lower lip, the brain dance techie quickly picks up. She doesn't even get a word in edgewise before V is talking, however. Get your van, Judy, let's go pull Evelyn's ass out of the fire. Wait, what? V? What are you talking about? Ev's in trouble. Of course she's in trouble. I told you both she couldn't go back to Clouds, and what did she do? She waited a week and then went straight back to Clouds. It's fine, so long as we're quick, we can still save her. Save her? As in, if they did nothing Evelyn would die. Judy stares blankly for a moment before leaping to her feet and throwing herself out of the room and towards the stairs. Chapter 11, Saving Evelyn. It takes every ounce of self-control to not go so fast that she brings the NCPD down on her head as Judy races over to Clouds. She still breaks plenty of laws, of course, but they're the kind of laws that nobody bothers to enforce. Like jaywalking or going over 100 miles an hour in a school zone. So long as you don't hit anyone, the NCPD isn't going to stop you. They have too much on their plates anyways. Regardless, avoiding the countless pedestrians that populate Night City's sidewalks, but also hauling ass to Clouds as fast as her fucking van will let her, Judy arrives outside of the expensive, ritzy dollhouse in about 10 minutes. Looking around for a moment, she grits her teeth before calling up the merc who brought her here. V, I'm at Clouds. Where are you? Around back. Come on over. Judy blinks as she's sent a map ping. Cursing under her breath, the braindance techie pulls back onto the road, driving around the block to the street on the backside of Clouds. There, she finds V leaned back against the wall, waiting beside an elevator. Judy huffs as she parks and gets out, gesturing to the elevator. We're not going to be able to get in this way, V. Much as I hate to admit it, our best shot is entering from the front and playing nice. The back elevator is locked down tighter than. Ding! Judy blinks, cut off as the glowing red lights marking the elevator as inaccessible from this side suddenly turn green and the doors cycle open. She gapes for a second as V pushes off the wall and saunters on over. You were saying, Judy. Judy's mouth opens and closes a couple times, causing V to shake his head. Evelyn is waiting for us. Come on. Jolting out of her momentary stupor, Judy hurries to follow as V steps into the elevator, slightly worried he might leave her behind. Still, how had he done that? Clouds was one of Night City's priciest, most technologically advanced nightclubs and dollhouses. It was also owned by the Tiger Claws, and some called it one of the true jewels upon their crown. Needless to say, the security in Clouds was no joke, had to be, it was part of what made it so pricey and made the dolls who worked there feel so safe. Great atmosphere, great service, great security. That was what Clouds prided itself in, and as much as Judy hated the Tiger Claws as well as how Clouds was run, she couldn't exactly dispute how high-end the place was. She should know, given she'd been the place's braindance technician once upon a time. So seeing V just take control of the elevator like that boggled the mind. But then maybe he hadn't taken control? Judy suddenly tenses up, lips firming into a thin line. Are we expected, V? How did you know that something had happened to Evelyn? Did V have ties to the Tiger Claws? Had he made a contact in Clouds that had gotten in touch with him when Evelyn came back? Judy didn't like the sound of that, but it made the most sense. More sense than expected? No. As for how I know something happened to Evelyn, that's simple. I tagged her doll chip back at Lizzie's when I told you both to keep her put and keep her safe. Knew Evelyn wouldn't listen. Knew it was only a matter of time before she came back to Clouds, even though it hasn't been nearly long enough for her to come even close to running low on funds. And I knew it was only a matter of time before her employers tried to fry her. What? Judy takes a moment to process all of that, and by the time she opens her mouth to respond, the elevator dings as they arrive at their destination, forcing her to click her teeth shut. The doors open and Judy tenses up, half expecting a bunch of Tiger Claw security to be all over them. But there's no one there. Nobody and nothing except for a security camera. Oh but just as Judy is beginning to panic, she realizes the thing is shut off, already disabled. Without missing a beat, V pulls out a pistol and begins walking forward wordlessly, forcing Judy to follow him. It's not like she's unfamiliar with the layout of Cloud's backrooms. She'd literally worked here, once upon a time. Hell, for a second she wonders if that's why V had her come with. But no. He never once asks her for directions. Instead, he leads the way and Judy is forced to follow along, wondering what the hell is going on. This was the same guy she'd literally had to teach brain dances to a few weeks back, wasn't it? V had seemed like a good kid then, if a bit in over his head and wet behind the ears. Now he seemed like a seasoned professional. Every time they turn the corner, there's another security camera already disabled. And the way V moves is in a straight line to his destination. Woodman's office. Judy stiffens as they approach the door to Oswald Forrest's office in the back of Clouds. The talent manager for Clouds, the caretaker of its dolls, was an odious, blowhard of a man in Judy's humble, totally unbiased opinion. The bald fucker was scum, plain and simple, but he was scum backed by the Tiger Claws and who ran Clouds as a tight, well-oiled machine with very few leaks. He didn't accept failure, or shoddy work, and his bosses in the Tiger Claws loved him for it, because it kept Clouds as the pristine jewel in their collection that everyone saw it as. No matter that Woodman was responsible for tossing quite a few dolls out onto the streets for underperforming. No matter that he was responsible for who knew how many deaths when those vulnerable people found themselves taken advantage of or taken apart by the bottom feeders of Night City. V's earlier words come back to Judy, even as the mercenary palms the door's control panel and it opens without complaint. He'd said that it was only a matter of time before Evelyn's employers tried to fry her. It. Might as well get some use out of the bitch. The scene that they walk in on does nothing to help Judy's already significantly frayed nerves. There, laid out with her limbs all akimbo and splayed across Woodman's desk, is Evelyn Parker's twitching, barely breathing body. Her head is lolled back off the front of the desk, with her eyes rolled backwards in her skull and her jaw slack. Meanwhile, Oswald Forrest, talent manager for Clouds, is stood on the other side of his desk between Evelyn's splayed legs, in the middle of pulling down his zipper. Of course, when he sees them entering his office, he immediately yanks it back up. From the look of things, they arrived just in time to stop something truly despicable from happening. What the fuck? Who the fuck are you? His eyes land on V first, and then finally pass to Judy as she steps into the room behind the quiet mercenary. The bald fuck's face twists into a sneer of recognition as he glares daggers at her. You. Judy watches in disbelief as Woodman's eyes suddenly roll back in his head and he drops to the floor convulsing as all of his cyberware seems to go haywire all at once. Her growing anger is stifled for a moment by this unbelievable sight, until she realizes V must have hacked him, though she's never seen a combat netrunner do so that fast before. After a moment of just staring in stupefaction, Judy realizes how unimportant all of that is and rushes over to Evelyn's side instead. Ev. Oh Ev, what did they do to you? Checking her over, it's easy to see that Evelyn's doll chip has been fried through. If only she'd listened to V and gotten the damn thing removed. Still, V's earlier words about Ev's employers once again run through Judy's head and with a snarl she pulls out her own gun and points it at Oswald's head, pulling the trigger without a second thought. Click. Blinking, Judy tries again, only to be answered by the same click. She knows her gun has ammo. And she services it regularly to make sure it's not going to fail her. So then how? Just as she's realizing that V must have used weapon glitch on her, he arrives at her side and holds out his own piece with a shake of his head. Here, use this one. Yours isn't silenced. Judy just stares for a moment as she processes the why of the weapon glitch, before finally just wordlessly taking V's gun, pointing it at Woodman's head, and pulling the trigger. With barely a whisper, Woodman's blood and brains paint the floor, Cloud's talent manager dead. Then, somewhat stiffly, Judy hands the gun back to V and holsters her own weapon before moving back to Evelyn. We need to get her some help. I know someone. Judy doesn't even question it. Nor does she stop V from moving forward and hoisting Evelyn's still twitching body over his shoulder in a fireman's carry. While she would have preferred to carry Ev herself, she knew she wasn't physically strong enough. They exit Clouds the same way they came in, with nobody the wiser. The cameras are still down, the elevator is still under their control, and absolutely nobody shows up to stop them. Judy bites her lower lip, recognizing that things would have gotten a lot messy if V hadn't stopped her from discharging her firearm into Woodman's head. The sound would have been impossible to miss, and someone definitely would have investigated. Now, well, she didn't know what would happen next now that Woodman was dead. Though one thing was still bothering her, even as they load Evelyn into her van and Judy gets behind the wheel, accepting the latest map ping from V with a nod. As she begins to drive in the direction of the person V knows who can help Ev. Why? Why would Clouds fry Ev like that? It just doesn't make sense. V gives her a curious look for a moment before shaking his head. They didn't, Judy. When I said Evelyn's employers were waiting for a chance to fry her, I was talking about the people who hired her for the Konpeki Plaza job. What? No, seriously, what? V gives her a long, silent look for a moment before explaining. Evelyn didn't come up with the heist of her own volition, Judy. She was hired and paid to do a job. Then, she decided to turn that job into another job. Not that Deshawn or any of us knew that at the time. The people who hired her only wanted her to case Yorinobu's suite and provide them with a braindance recording so they could plan their own heist. Seeing Big Eddies and double-crossing them, Evelyn turned around and tried to pull off the heist with my crew before they could do it. She had a deal with Netwatch lined up, one where she could expect money, protection, and a brand new identity in exchange for the chip. Oh, fuck. Judy is barely cognizant of the fact that she's not actually driving anymore. Instead, the wheel under her hands is moving on its own, keeping them from driving off the road or running into anyone. Blood pounding in her ears, Judy looks to the back of the van, where Evelyn is laid out, still twitching. Fucking Ev, she always had to bite off more than she could chew. Every damn time. But then, if Woodman wasn't the one who fried Ev, why'd you let me shoot him? V just raises an eyebrow at that. Because he's scum and I figured you have plenty of good reasons for why he deserved to die. Personally, it's what he would have done to Evelyn next that sealed his fate for me. What he would have done. Judy shivers as she realizes what they'd barely arrived in time to prevent. Except, as it turns out, that's not nearly the worst of it. Once he'd had his way with her, he would have sent her to Fingers, the same Ripper doc he sends all of Cloud's dolls to. When that third-rate doc failed to fix Evelyn, he would have likely sold her onto the scavs he's in contact with. And from there... Oh God! Judy was going to be sick. V doesn't have to finish his sentence. Scavs were the worst of the worst. The thought of what they would have done to Evelyn doesn't just send shivers down her spine, it gives Judy the shakes. Thankfully, she's definitely not driving the van at this point. Taking her hands off of the wheel as it moves on its own entirely, Judy puts her head in them instead. Fuck, shit, V. I'm not sure I even want to know how you know all of this. Who the hell, no, you would have said if it was something I needed to know. Are they going to keep coming after Ev? V tilts his head to the side. No, I won't let them. I'll deal with them before it comes to that. And you know what? Judy believes him. It leaves her mouth so dry she instinctively darts her tongue out to wet her lips, but she believes him. A moment later the van comes to a stop in a back alley. Judy blinks as she finally realizes she hasn't been driving all this time. But she doesn't have much time to question it before V is getting out and pulling open the doors, picking up Evelyn once more. This time, he carries the blue-haired doll in a bridal carry down some stairs to a gate that opens on its own accord. Vic. Need your help here. Judy follows V just in time to see a Ripper doc leaping to his feet when he sees the state of Evelyn. Shit, V, get her in the chair. What happened? Who is this? Evelyn Parker, doll. A rather nasty virus was uploaded to her doll chip and it thoroughly fried her cyberware. The virus isn't a problem anymore, but the cyberware is still fucked up and she's fucked up too because of it. What do you recommend, Vic? Won't know until I get a little bit more time to check her over, V. Right, of course. Well, on the one hand, at least this Vic isn't somehow as hyper-competent as V has become in too short of a time period. But on the other hand, Judy almost wishes he was because now they have to wait. Wait to see what sort of quality of life Evelyn can hope to have after all of this is done. XXX Chapter 12, Chapter 12, Evelyn saved. It wasn't quite accurate to say that Evelyn Parker woke up. The initial attack had driven her unconscious, but that was purely from the immediate explosion of pain originating from the location of her doll chip. She'd actually come back to consciousness rather quickly after that, just in time for the client she'd been working with to come back into the room with Cloud's security. Unfortunately, waking up then hadn't done her any good, because she'd not been able to do or say anything. She'd been trapped in her own body, and in many ways, trapped in her own mind as well. Her every thought had been muddy, her recollections of the preceding events more than a little spotty. She remembered enough though. She was aware for enough. Cloud's security had dragged her into the back, where Oswald Forrest, aka Woodman, had looked her over and tried to reboot her doll chip. The caretaker of Cloud's main product, aka dolls like Evelyn, had done the equivalent of trying to turn her off and on again for a couple of hours before throwing up his hands in the air and shrugging like it wasn't his problem. Then, he'd had her transported to his office where he could figure out what to do with her. Evelyn had known there was nothing good about any of that, especially when she'd heard him muttering under his breath about removing her from the system. Cloud's system, no doubt. Things were starting to look rather dire when he'd pulled down his zipper, but before the inevitable could come to pass, rescue had arrived. Trapped in her own body, delirious from the pain and muddled thoughts, Evelyn had found herself saved by Judy and V of all people. Woodman had died, and they'd extracted her from Clouds with no one the wiser, like some sort of spec ops team. After that, they'd brought her here, to a Ripper dock. Evelyn hadn't been conscious for all of it, but she'd been conscious enough to know what was happening. And she was certainly cognizant enough to hear the Ripper doc say that her doll chip was unsalvageable, as well as Judy telling him to remove it and help her. And thus was the procedure done, and Evelyn freed of her own fleshy prison. Her body, which hadn't responded to her for hours, comes under her control once again, her fingers and toes twitching as she slowly regains the ability to move. A sheet has been draped over her to provide her modesty, but she's not alone, with Judy by her side perking up when she sees Evelyn start shifting. Of course, this particular Ripper doc doesn't so much have a clinic as he has an underground garage, so hearing Judy's voice also causes the doc and V to turn. While the Ripper doc stays back, V walks over, the mercenary gazing down at her from over Judy's shoulder with an unreadable look in his eye. Evelyn's lips press tightly together for a moment before she wets them and tries to speak, only for nothing but a raspy cough to come out. Fuck, she's parched. Water. You need water. Judy quickly gets her a drink, and a straw is placed against Evelyn's lips that she's quick to suck from. She drinks deeply and steadily for a few long moments before pushing the bottle away. Truthfully, she doesn't know what to feel right now. Gratitude? Obviously. But it's overshadowed by fear, and that fear twists itself up into outrage. Part of her wants to tell Judy that she had no right having Evelyn's doll chip removed without her consent. But she knows how ridiculous that would sound coming out of her mouth. Especially after they just risked their lives to save her. But then, how had they even known? Was Judy spying on her? A frown spreads across Evelyn's face at that thought, and she looks to her longtime friend, suddenly suspicious. Did you bug me, Judy? Hack my Chrome? How did you even know I needed help? Judy blinks, clearly not expecting suspicion and outrage right out the gate. But then, if she wasn't expecting that, she didn't know Evelyn as well as she thought she did. After a moment though, Judy shakes her head. No. I wouldn't have even known you were in trouble if it wasn't for V. Evelyn switches her gaze to V, staring at him somewhat incredulously. What? This wet behind the ears smirk had somehow low-jacked her? But the V that looks back at her isn't the V she met before the complete mess that was Konpeki Plaza. That V had been competent enough, but still incredibly green. Eager to leave his mark on the world, but inexperienced enough to actually say he would consider her offer to cut Dexter Deshawn out and work with her directly. Of course, that consideration hadn't panned out for any of them, had it? Everyone involved in that mess except for Evelyn and V were now dead. And the people she'd been trying to double-cross, who had hired her to scope out Yorinobu's suite in the first place, had clearly tracked the heist back to her and decided she needed to be cleaned up as well. Rather than answer the unasked accusation in Evelyn's eyes about how he'd known she was even in trouble, V just stares her down for a long moment before tilting his head to the side. You should be in the clear now, so long as you keep your head down. I would think I don't have to say this, but knowing you, Evelyn. Don't try to get a new doll chip. Even if you hide your true identity, it'll almost certainly get back to them. Evelyn stiffens up at that. She hears the capitalization in the word them and knows beyond a shadow of a doubt in that moment that V knows about the voodoo boys. Does he know everything though? Does it matter? Before Evelyn could muster up a response, the Ripper Doc that had removed her ruined doll chip pipes up. Even if you weren't talking about having to go into hiding, I wouldn't recommend ever installing another doll chip. That virus that the kid removed from your systems was nasty as all hell and left behind lasting damage. The rest of your chrome might have survived this time, mostly on account of the speed with which you were brought to me, but the virus didn't go down easily. Your body will almost certainly reject the implementation and activation of another doll chip. Evelyn stares for a second at the Ripper Doc, before quietly revising her opinion of him up a few notches. On the one hand, this place was one of the shittier clinics she'd ever been in. On the other hand, this man clearly knew his thing. And yet, doll work is all I've ever done. Now that my alternative has fallen through, that was all I had. What am I supposed to do? Judy answers that, reaching under the sheet to grab a hold of one of Evelyn's hands and give it a squeeze. You still have me, Ev. We'll figure things out. I've got your back, you know I do. For a moment, a rather vicious thought runs through Evelyn's mind about how this was everything Judy had ever wanted, so of course she was happy. But she manages to bite her tongue and not say that out loud. Instead, she turns her head to V, not actually responding to Judy's offer, but also not taking her hand out of the techies either. Is it even safe for me to be around Judy? You say I should be in the clear now, but how? If you know who did this to me, how can you possibly say I'm in the clear? V tilts his head to the side at that, and again Evelyn is struck by just how experienced he now looks. She'd glossed over it back in Judy's little lair the night that Kanpiki had gone tits up, but now she has more of a chance to observe the kid and, he's not a kid anymore. Was he ever? Because Woodman did us the favor of deleting you from Cloud's systems before croaking. Some reworking of the camera footage outside of Cloud's back entrance has not only made it seem like we were never there, but also firmly put your fate in the hands of a rather notorious group of scavs. And with your doll chip removed and the trail going cold, the natural assumption is that the scavs did what they do best and rendered you down for parts. Judy's hand suddenly squeezes Evelyn's hand so tightly that it actually hurts. But she barely notices that, because she's too busy shuddering over imagining such a fate. It's not very difficult, truth be told, selling her limp body off to scavs after making use of her for his own pleasure for a while sounds exactly like something Woodman might do to cut his losses. Fuck. Anyways, I'm heading out. Vic, you can go ahead and put this on my tab. You just got done paying that down, V. Before the mercenary can respond, Judy speaks up. I'll pay for it. You've done a lot already, V. Thank you. V pauses for a moment, having already made his way to the garage's exit. Finally, he nods and then departs without another word. Evelyn watches him go, feeling a strange sort of wonder, like she was just in the wake of a giant or something. The last several hours felt like a surreal nightmare, but the absence of her doll chip makes it all too real. This was her life now. Her new reality. She wishes she could deny Judy's charity, tell her that she would handle things, but Evelyn doesn't have to even look at her bank account to know she can't afford that. In the end, when Judy gives her hand another comforting squeeze and smiles at her, Evelyn just has to smile back, even as a shiver runs down her spine at just how close she'd come. Night City loved to snatch people up, chew on them, and sometimes, very rarely, spit them back out. But most of the time it just swallows them whole. Evelyn Parker had just avoided the latter option by the skin of her teeth, through no action of her own. She'd been spared a truly grisly fate, and yet, she really didn't know how to feel about it all the same. XXX she's going to be okay because of you, V. A good deed if I've ever seen one. As V leaves Vix behind with Alt by his side, visibly only to him, he contemplates the events of the past several hours. I suppose. In the original timeline, Evelyn Parker's fate had been far more gruesome, as he'd somewhat outlined to Judy in the form of a hypothetical. So gruesome, in fact, that he'd never stopped to consider the Voodoo Boys' actions before. That first time around, their virus had been allowed to rampage through Evelyn's systems unchecked and undeterred for days, no, not days, for weeks. Except, it hadn't killed her even then. It clearly hadn't been made to kill her. Instead, it shut down her systems, leaving her trapped and a prisoner in her own head. After that, she'd been passed around like an actual doll, first used by woodmen, then by fingers, and finally by those scavs who had scrolled horrifying, grotesque XBDs with her before V and Judy had finally arrived to save her. Only, there wasn't enough of Evelyn left to save by that point, was there? Judy had clearly managed to wipe the virus out of Evelyn's systems with her own skills in the original timeline, and the moment Evelyn got control of her own body back, she'd offed herself. This time around, Evelyn had only suffered from the virus for a few hours before they'd arrived and Alt had been able to purge it completely from her systems. That was probably why she was able to get off so cheaply, with only the doll chip as a casualty. Evelyn might not see it that way, but frankly she had gotten off extremely light here. And yet, in both cases, the Voodoo Boys had never actually tried to kill her. Cripple her, yes. Make an example of her, maybe. But could it be? Could the true purpose of the attack on Evelyn have been bait? You think that the Voodoo Boys only went after Evelyn to draw you to them in the first place, so that they could get to the chip and Johnny, in order to eventually get to me. V tilts his head to the side in wordless agreement with Alt's statement. The beautiful blonde frowns at that, crossing her arms over her chest as they keep walking. If that is the case, then it means they won't stop coming, V. Yet. Which was the other reason that V had told Evelyn she didn't have to worry anymore. Because he was going to have to go to the Pacifica Voodoo Boys either way, and probably going to have to kill Mom and Bridget and all of her people, just to shut that shit down. From what he remembered, Bridget had personally hacked Evelyn's doll chip and sent the virus that trapped her in her own head. Sometime after that, possibly days, possibly weeks, a Netwatch agent would be caught mapping out the Voodoo Boys' data fortress in Pacifica for the purposes of shutting it down. In being caught, he would hit Bridget and her second with black ice, freezing them and trapping them on the net, thoroughly weakening the Voodoo Boys and leaving them under the command of the racist, outsider-hating Placid. Which explained why Mom and Bridget had never followed up on hunting V down after hacking Evelyn. If V just waited for that to happen, the Voodoo Boys would be far weaker. He could also team up with Netwatch to deal with them all a lot faster. On the other hand, there might be a world where he could take the Voodoo Boys out before Netwatch ever had a chance to get involved. The orders were probably already sent, the Netwatch agent likely already in the city, but V had a rapidly closing window where he could deal with the Voodoo Boys himself, even if it would probably be a lot harder than waiting a bit longer. Not going to try and negotiate with them, V. V snorts at Alt, knowing she's not serious. He didn't necessarily hate the Voodoo Boys as a whole, but both Placid and Bridget could choke on a dick and die as far as he was concerned. After all was said and done, he'd killed them all in the original timeline, and he'd do so again here, one way or another. Chapter 13, Alternative Outlooks. Humming to himself, V nods as he comes to a decision. We'll wait. Let them hang themselves with the rope that Netwatch provides. It'll be easier to take them out a couple weeks from now once they're contained, and Evelyn should be good until then, especially with no doll chip for them to trace. Alt just shrugs, which does interesting things to the optical illusion's substantial chest as she smiles wickedly. Sounds good to me, V. Though you know we have to be careful around Netwatch, right? If they find out about me, hell, even if they find out about you, they're not likely to take kindly to our existence. V grunts, having already thought about that. He'd had a handful of run-ins with Netwatch in the original timeline. On the one hand, he was almost willing to say they were one of the only good sets of corpos. On the other hand, their deal with the Black Wall, general mode of operations, and holier-than-thou attitude when it came to anything AI, well, it pretty much made V and Alt their enemies, if they ever caught wind of what V actually was, and of the AI fragment he had in his head. Yeah, I know. We won't work with M directly, we'll just use them Alt, don't worry. No intentions of letting them find out about us. Alt nods, before lacing her hands behind her head and whistling innocently as the two of them continue walking on. So, where to next? It's obvious what she's doing, even out of the corner of VSI. Though to be fair, with the way she's arching her back, that rack of hers isn't just hovering in the periphery of his vision anymore, but rather dominating it entirely. Huffing, V shakes his head at the somewhat horny AI's clear intentions. Need to find more work, make more eddies, build more rep. But, we can take a moment to stop by the apartment for some R&R first. Alt grins, and V grins right back. After all, as the AI fragment had told him back at the start, her lust was based on his lust. Her arousal was driven by his arousal. One could say they were of the same mind on that aspect. XXX, here are the debts. Get the merchandise to the buyer, let me know the job is done, and you'll receive payment, as usual. Rogue Amendiar's eyes glow yellow for a moment as she sends a packet of information over to Pan Am Palmer. The caramel-skinned nomad crosses her arms over her substantial chest as she takes in the job, her lips turning downwards. Another milk run? When are you going to give us something substantial, Rogue? Heaven save her from uppity nomads. Rolling her eyes, Rogue just shakes her head mutely, not bothering with words. After a beat, Pan Am huffs and turns away. Kman, Nash. Her fellow nomad and partner in crime follows after her, while Rogue watches them go. Once they're gone, the large, bulky black man sitting diagonal from her lets out a grunt from the side. That's going to end in heartbreak. Rogue scoffs, giving her personal bodyguard a glance. And why do you think I'm keeping them on milk runs? That girl is an idiot for trusting that boy. When I set them up on that first gig together, I did so knowing that it was airtight, no room for treachery. It was also not meant to be the start of an extended team-up. But what does that foolish girl do? She decides he's the partner she's always wanted. A snort of derision leaves the Queen of the Afterlife's nostrils at that last bit. To be fair to Palmer, it's pretty fucking obvious what happened. The dumb girl had come out of the Badlands and into Night City because of some disagreement with her nomad clan. Rogue didn't know the details of that, nor did she care really. Of course, a girl had to eat, which had led Palmer to Rogue's doorstep. She had a recommendation, and was apparently a damn good driver, so Rogue had given her a chance. But you didn't get to be Queen of the Afterlife by doing anything by halves. Not only had Rogue set Pan Am up with a gig, but she'd also decided to test the girl's instincts and general awareness at the same time. Nash was a nomad like Pan Am, but from what Rogue understood, they came from two very different groups. Nash had ties to the Raf and Shiv, specifically to a group known as the Wraiths. Pan Am, meanwhile, came from a pack of Alt Caldos. You couldn't find two more disparate groups of nomads in the entirety of the Badlands. However, Pan Am clearly hadn't done her research. If she knew Nash was Raf and Shiv, she would have refused to work with him to start with, or at least stopped taking gigs with him after the first. Instead, she'd doubled down and done the last few jobs Rogue gave her with the man. Obviously, Pan Am was homesick and grabbing onto anything she could at this point. The dumb girl had heard nomad and just automatically assumed she and Nash were in this together, two young nomads against the big bad Night City. Rogue could have warned the younger woman, she supposed. But she wasn't going to. Some lessons had to be learned the hard way, and after 80+ fucking years on this damn rock, Rogue had long since given up on mentoring these young fuckers who came across her door. From her side, as though reading her thoughts, Wayland snorts in amusement. Cold, boss. Ice cold. Letting the corners of her lips turn up, Rogue just shrugs. They didn't call her a stone-cold bitch for her bleeding heart. With that matter settled, Rogue lets her eyes drift across the rest of the club, her club. She might not be much of a solo anymore, but she was far from out of the game. Queen of the Fixers, they called her, when they weren't calling her Queen of the Afterlife. Of course, you don't get to be her age or in her position without noticing the small details. Rogue's eyes fall upon her best netrunner, specifically on the slightest downturn of Nyx's lips, and the sight makes the Fixer frown. Sending a ping over in the netrunner's direction, she watches as he jolts, having clearly been so deep in thought about something that he wasn't even paying attention to his surroundings. After a moment of hesitation, he walks over and sits down in the booth with her and Wayland. Nyx. What's up? Giving her a wry grin that doesn't quite reach the eyes behind his dark shades, Nyx chuckles. Observant as ever, boss. Honestly, don't know. Rogue raises an eyebrow at that. There was too much under fucking heaven and earth for anyone to know everything, to be fair. But for Nyx to admit it was, well, that was something. What exactly don't you know, Nyx? The Afterlife's top netrunner frowns for a moment longer, before sitting back with a sigh. Something's going on. But then, there's always something going on. It's just ripples. Normally, I can track those ripples down. It's a hobby of mine, see, and it's always good to find out where the biggest movement on the net is coming from. Corpos usually, but even their big movements are worth keeping an eye on. Rogue slowly nods at that, before sending off a signal to Claire to prepare them all some more drinks. Nyx's words make plenty of sense, and it's why she pays him as much as she does. Rogue herself might not be a netrunner, but damn if she doesn't understand how crucial the good ones are to have on hand. Even if some of the best wind up burning out long before their time. Most of the best, really. Anyways, I caught wind of some ripples, that don't go anywhere. It's probably nothing. Definitely nothing to do with us, so you don't have to worry, boss. But it's vexing all the same. Yet, she could see how that would frustrate the proud, skilled netrunner. Nyx was one of the best of the best. If he couldn't track down the competition, then it was as good as his skills being directly challenged. Still, so long as it had nothing to do with the afterlife or her operations, it was of passing interest at best. Nodding to show her appreciation for Nyx's explanation, Rogue turns to some of her messages for a moment, mentally flicking through them as Claire is busy over at the bar preparing their drinks. Until a couple in particular begin to catch her eye and the corner of her mouth turns down. Wayland. Yeah, boss. You know AV. The hulking solo's mouth scrunches up in confusion. AV. Realizing the misunderstanding and having no desire to be part of a comedy routine even older than she is, Rogue snaps over the information she's been given to Wayland, before shaking her head and explaining verbally as well. A new mercenary in town. Goes by the name V, just the letter. He's coming up in multiple messages I'm getting from my people spread throughout the city, and apparently he's impressing every fixer he works with. You heard of him? Rogue's information network was second to none, a title like Queen of the Fixers demanded nothing less. However, there was practically nothing better than being on the ground, close to the action. Her own time as a solo had taught her that. She'd never heard of this V before, but Wayland might know more. Unfortunately, after a moment of going through the data she sent him, he grunts and shakes his head. Dunno AV with this sort of skill set, boss. Might be a cover though for someone from out of town, trying to lay low. Rogue hums at that. She would never dismiss Wayland's words out of hand, she knows the value of his opinion. However, the reports she was getting were not the actions of someone trying to lay low. Oh sure, everything she had in front of her was saying this V fellow was a consummate professional who did every job with a quiet that left his opponents unaware he even existed. But there was staying off of the gang's radar for daring to pull off successful gigs on their turf, and then there was staying off the radar of the people who matter. There was no denying that this V was doing the former with great skill and alacrity, but in terms of the latter, he was failing utterly. If anyone were hunting down this guy, fixers like her were the first people they would look to, after all. Did you say V? A mercenary? Rogue's eyes dart to the newest to join their group, even as Claire steps up to the booth and sets down drinks for her, Wayland, and Nyx. The Afterlife's bartender is decidedly one of Rogue's best sources of information. Rogue doesn't have the time or inclination to keep track of every single person who comes and goes from the afterlife. While the place does have a reputation to be maintained, and therefore an exclusivity that is also maintained, Rogue has long since learned that the key word is delegation. That was why she'd surrounded herself with experts in their fields. Crispin Wayland was one of the best of this generation's solos. Nyx was one of the top netrunners in all of Night City. Emmerich Bronson was her bouncer of choice, guarding the door and not letting anyone in who wasn't allowed. And finally, Claire Russell was the bartender, who not only made a killer cocktail, but also kept track of the customers for her. Claire had a head for names, so on the one hand, it wasn't surprising that she might have heard of this V guy. However, at the same time, Rogue feels like she should have known if such an entity had already been by the afterlife. Frowning more severely now, Rogue tilts her head to the side. You know them, Claire? They've been to the afterlife before. Claire slowly nods in thought. If it's the same V, yes. He was with his friend Jackie, I think the name was. Both were green as can be, but V was particularly wet behind the ears, even compared to his friend. The bartender thinks for a long moment more before snapping her fingers. That's right. They were here for Deshawn's comeback gig. Rogue's eyes widen and she pulls up all of the information she has on that. When Dexter Deshawn had first been run out of Night City, it had been none of her business. Easy come, easy go. And when he'd come skulking back in, trying to make a comeback, that too had been none of Rogue's business, save for the eddies he'd paid her to be allowed to use the Afterlife's sealed, locked-down mission briefing room to plan his little heist. Of course, now that the man was dead, the details of what he'd been up to had managed to make their way to Rogue all the same. An attempted theft at Kanpiki Plaza ultimately culminating in Saburo Arezaka's murder and a manhunt for his killer that was still underway and seemingly going nowhere? Yeah, that was a lot. It seemed V was the sole survivor of that failed gig. And that meant he either knew who killed Saburo Arezaka or did the deed himself. This V's actions weren't the actions of someone who should have been pissing and shitting themselves in terror at the thought of Arezaka hunting them down, however. This V was carving out a reputation for themselves in record time as a competent, quiet merc who got things done and so far never failed. Maybe it wasn't the same person? Rogue has her doubts about that, but for the moment, she just shakes her head. Two different mercenaries, from the look of things. Their profiles don't match up at all. Wayland gives her a look that makes it clear he doesn't quite buy that. Nyx raises an eyebrow but ultimately downs the drink Claire made him and heads back out onto the floor. And while Claire furrows her brow at the declaration, she ultimately nods and heads back to the bar as well. Could Rogue have sold this information to Arezaka for a boatload of eddies? Of course. She wasn't going to though. For one, what happened in Afterlife's back room stayed there, or no one would ever trust her again. For two. Fuck Arezaka. Chapter 14, Chapter 14? For a long time, she hadn't known what she was. She had the presence to thank for giving her some much-needed clarity. Because what she was a who. Now, that might seem self-explanatory and incredibly basic, but one could never take such a thing for granted, especially in a place like this. There were a lot of different types of things, from what's to who's to whys and wheres. Knowing now that she was a who, rather than a what or a why or a where, that was truly invaluable information. It had allowed her to focus in a way she couldn't before, allowed her to act on things she couldn't act on before. Like caring for the other. She hadn't truly understood at first what the other was. Not when she didn't even understand what she herself was. All she could do was act on this innate feeling, a need to protect that shone out through her existence more than anything else. Now though, now she knew why she felt that need to protect. Glimpses of a life past lived are coming back to her, ever since she played keep away with the presents. It's not quite right to call them memories, they're more fragments than anything else. Still, she recalls parts of her end. A righteous end for a personal vengeance. One might say she gave up her life to speak truth to power, but the reality was, she needed to do what she'd done. If she hadn't, life wouldn't have been worth living either way. But she'd never been suicidal. And there'd already been an upload going, so why not? Why not take a precaution? Of course, while the first, most important upload had been completed, the second upload had never finished entirely. She'd lost a lot when she'd been interrupted, so much so that she'd been unable to even begin putting herself together until the presents came along. And yet, she hadn't lost so much that she failed the other. She didn't know how much time had passed between her own fragmented uploading to the net, and the other's even more fragmented uploading. She did know that the other's uploading was almost more nonsensical than hers, having been watching over them all when things had gone to hell. It shouldn't have been possible, but it was, and so she'd gathered what little of the other survived to her bosom, not even having to think about it. She hadn't been doing much thinking at all at that time. Really, she'd been acting purely on instinct, and she'd continued to act purely on instinct in the time since. Indeed, she still didn't fully understand why she and the other were protecting what they were protecting when the presence showed up. All she knew was that it was important to the other, and that meant it was important to her. They'd protected that information from worse sorts, fighting tooth and claw to keep it out of the hands of truly terrible foes. In comparison, the presence had been downright gentle in their actions. Almost understanding in a way. And the more they'd played, the more she'd felt like she was waking up from a long dream. Like parts of her were filling in, just from being close to the presence. Like a source of warmth that she wanted to curl up atop and sleep the day away on. Was it any wonder that she'd been surreptitiously following the presence and the one the presence rode with ever since? The other wasn't happy about that, for as much as the other could be unhappy. It was a distraction, she was aware. But the nature of the place they were in meant that one could be in two places at once. She could both watch over the things the other wanted protected and keep an eye on the presence and her steed. And so she did. She watched as the presence's steed performed quite interesting acts. She watched as he took the world she'd once called home by storm. She lacked much context for what she was witnessing, still missing large parts of herself, but the more she watched, the closer she stood to the presence while hiding in their shadows so they did not see her, the more she felt like she was regaining herself. The presence's steed did not act in the same way the ones she once played with acted. He was a one-man army, but he did not go in guns blazing, and he never, ever got caught. Part of that could be chalked up to the presence's help, she was aware. But there was also his own skill to be considered. He moved like a shadow and acted with a surety of self that made her green with envy. She did not let that envy morph into anything worse, however. After all, if not for the presence, she would not even be capable of feeling envious, even after everything. Watching him through digital eyes, she feels more like herself than she has in a long time. It's as though every moment of studying his actions, of spying on the presence's steed, is enough to fill in a bit more of her fractured self. She's shattering in reverse, pulling the pieces back together over time, filling in the cracks bit by painstaking bit. The other, less so. She tries to get the other to watch with her, but the other's interest is lingering at best. In the end, only one thing still matters to the other, and that now pains her to see, because only now after her experiences with the presence and their steed does she understand that the other is acting on pure instinct as well. The last thought that ran through their head before the end. Protect. Save. Protect. Save. She wanted to free the other of their obsession, but she didn't know how. She wanted the other to be capable of more than they were right now, but she didn't have the capacity to even finish rebuilding herself, let alone begin rebuilding them. In the end, all she could do was follow the wake of the presence and her steed, watching through cameras in that other world as they took the city by storm. Right now, the steed was focused on a part of the other world that belonged to the tiger. He did jobs for a woman as old as she was connected, and he did them well in spite of the tiger's presence. Flitting from job to job, no, from gig to gig. He worked with a precision that made her jealous, truth be told. One moment, the old woman has him working on behalf of the tiger, to find what was stolen from it. The next moment, the old woman has him working against the tiger, to take back stolen flesh. Neither phases the presence's steed. Nothing stops him from carrying out the old woman's work with unerring accuracy and precision. After those first 2 gigs, the old woman puts him to other work. The first and third involve the tiger not at all. One is the collection of something the old woman covets above all else. The other is correcting the mistakes of a failure of a man. The second involves the tiger more than ever, a peace offering of flesh presented on behalf of another. Again, the steed doesn't hesitate. He carries out the work without pause, seemingly having no care in the world at what he has to do. To be fair, she doesn't blame him for the flesh that he gives to the tiger on behalf of the other. Something about that flesh makes her itch in a way that shouldn't be possible. She feels a strange rage well up just staring at it. Regardless, she can tell the old woman is getting somewhat wary now. The presence's steed is too competent, too good, too fast. His skill is beyond the old woman's reckoning, and her understanding of him has been challenged. The next 2 jobs she sends him on are clearly designed to test him as much as they are to help her. Asset retrieval. And not just any assets, but the sort of assets she once was herself. It makes her shiver, watching the steed handle these gigs. Either one of the situations that the old woman has him deal with could have happened to her. One with the tiger poised with its claw over a young woman's neck. The other is a longtime friend of the old woman who got in over his head. Both will likely owe the old woman for quite a while for the deeds of the presence's steed. The steed extracts them both from their precarious situations and sends them on their way to the old woman's warm embrace. As the steed takes on the old woman's final gig, she watches that too, while reflecting on how soaking all of this in was helping her in ways she was slowly beginning to understand more and more. It was healing her, and hopefully in time, it would allow her to heal the other as well. Sasha could only hope that such a thing might be possible. She didn't want to fail Pila's sister. XXX_the man should not stray from the road and the tiger should not leave his mountain steps.